He pressed his boot down on the wounded American's chest and leaned in close enough that the young SEAL could smell the smoke and sweat on him. "Where is your rescue now?" the enemy commander sneered, kicking the man's rifle away into the dark. "No planes, no helicopters. No God is coming for you tonight." He raised his own weapon toward the pinned soldier's face and laughed a low, satisfied sound, certain that 40 of his fighters had already won. He was wrong. 400 meters up the ridge, a scope was already tracking the back of his skull. Before we go on, if you believe courage can come from the last person anyone expected, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And leave a comment telling me the city where you're watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The name of that enemy commander was Rashid, and Rashid had been fighting men in these mountains for 19 years. He had buried brothers here. He had buried sons here. He had learned to read the fear on a soldier's face the way other men read the weather, and tonight, standing over the bleeding American, he read only one thing: defeat. Total, finished, hopeless defeat. "Tell your men to lay down their guns," Rashid said, loud enough for the shadows to hear him, loud enough for the trapped Americans crouched behind the rocks to understand every word. "Tell them, and maybe some of you go home to your mothers. Fight, and I promise you, not one of you sees the sun." Captain Ethan Cole heard him. Ethan Cole was 34 years old, and he had led men through more bad nights than he could count, but he had never heard his own heartbeat the way he heard it now. He was pressed flat behind a spine of broken rock, his rifle empty, his radio spitting nothing but static, and 11 meters to his left, one of his youngest operators, a kid named Torres, was lying in the open with a boot on his chest and a gun in his face. "Hold," Ethan whispered into the dark. "Everybody hold." "Cap, they've got Torres." That was Reyes somewhere behind him, his voice tight as wire. "They've got Torres, and they're gonna do him right there." "I know. We can't just—" "I know, Reyes." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, and in that half a second, he did the math no commander ever wants to do. 6 men left standing, 1 down and bleeding out, 1 down and pinned, maybe 11 rounds between all of them. And out there in the black, more muzzle flashes than he could count a horseshoe of them tightening. They were surrounded. That word had never applied to him before. Not once. He had been ambushed. He had been outnumbered. He had been shot, but he had never been surrounded. And there is a particular kind of cold that fills a man's stomach the first time he understands that every direction is the wrong direction. "Sir," a new voice calmer than the rest came from his right. It belonged to the SEAL sniper Sergeant Ryan Walker, who had crawled up beside him without a sound. "Overwatch is down." Ethan turned his head. "Say again." "Overwatch? The Ridge team. They're gone, Cap. I've been trying to raise them for 4 minutes." "Nothing." Ryan's jaw was set hard. "Somebody got up above them. We lost the high ground before we even knew we were in a fight." And there it was, the whole trap laid bare in a single sentence. This had never been a weapons cache to seize and photograph and leave. This had been a mouth, and they had walked straight into it, and now the mouth was closing. "Torres is moving," Reyes hissed. No, don't, kid, don't." Down in the open ground, young Torres had made a decision that only a 19-year-old with a boot on his chest makes. He grabbed the barrel of the gun, pointed at his face, and shoved it sideways, and the whole valley erupted. Muzzle flashes bloomed across the horseshoe. Rounds cracked off the rocks above Ethan's head. He felt stone chips sting his cheek, and he heard Rashid roar something in a language he half understood, and he heard Torres screaming, and he heard, worst of all, the flat mechanical patient chatter of a machine gun swinging their way. "They've got a PK up on the left shoulder," Ryan said, and there was no fear in his voice, only information. "That gun opens up on this position. We're all dead in 10 seconds. I need to take it. I need an angle." "You don't have one?" "I'll make one." "Ryan." But Ryan Walker was already moving low and fast, dragging his long rifle across the rock toward a notch that might give him a line on that gun. Ethan wanted to grab his ankle and pull him back. He didn't, because Ryan was right, because that gun was going to kill all of them, and 1 man exposed for 3 seconds was better than 7 men dead in 10. Ethan counted. 1, 2, on 3 the machine gun found Ryan Walker. Ethan didn't see it so much as feel it the way you feel a door slam in another room. He heard the impact, heard the grunt, heard the long rifle clatter down across the stone, and then he heard nothing from Ryan at all. "Ryan," he crawled. "Ryan, talk to me." The sniper was on his back, one hand pressed to his side, his teeth bared. "I'm here," he ground out. "I'm here, Cap. It went through. I think it went through." "Where's it hit?" "Low, left. I can't." Ryan tried to lift his rifle and his arms shook and dropped. "I can't hold it. My hand won't. Cap, I can't make the shot." And Ethan Cole, 34 years old veteran of more bad nights than he could count, felt the last door in the room slam shut. Because that rifle in Ryan's failing hands had been their one answer. That rifle in the hands of a man who could actually use it was the difference between 11 minutes and eternity. And the only man who could use it was lying in the dirt, unable to lift his own arm. That is where the story of Maya Reynolds truly begins. Not in the mud of that valley and not with that boot on Taurus's chest. It begins with a question no one thought to ask about a woman no one thought to notice. Because there was an eighth person on that mission, a ninth body in that valley. And every single man on that team had at some point in the last 72 hours looked right past her. Her name was Specialist Maya Reynolds. She was 25 years old. She was Army, not Navy, which on a joint task force made her a guest, an outsider, a tag-along. And she was not a shooter. She was an intelligence analyst, the person who read the maps and studied the photographs and told everyone else where to point their expensive equipment. She had come along on this mission for one reason and one reason only, to lay eyes on the weapons cache and confirm what her reports had predicted. She was supposed to look at boxes and take notes. That was the whole job. Right now, she was flat on her belly, 40 meters behind and above the pinned SEAL team in a fold of rock she had chosen almost without thinking 2 hours ago when they first entered the valley. She had chosen it because something about the ground had bothered her. The trail was too easy. The approach was too open. Every instinct she had built over 11 months of staring at satellite imagery had whispered the same thing as they walked in. This is a place designed to be walked into. She had said so, quietly, to the SEAL nearest her, a big man named Kowalski, as they moved up the valley floor. "This ground makes me nervous," she'd told him. Kowalski had glanced at her the way a bricklayer glances at a man who has wandered onto his site in a suit. Not unkind, just amused. "You see a lot of nervous ground behind that computer army." "I see the ground that ambushes get planned on," she'd said. "This looks like the pictures." He'd smiled and said nothing, and they'd walked on, and now Kowalski was down there behind the rocks with the rest of them, and Maya was up here, and the ground had done exactly what she'd said it would do. She was not thinking "I told you so." There is no smaller, more useless thought on a battlefield. She was thinking about angles. She had a rifle. Of course she had a rifle. Everyone who walked out that gate carried one, even the analysts. Hers was a standard carbine, not a sniper platform, not built for 400 meters of guesswork in the dark. But she also had something in her hands right now that she should not have had. And to understand how it got there, you have to understand what had happened 3 months before this night in a much quieter place with a much quieter man. His name was Sergeant Major Daniel Carter, and he was the reason Maya Reynolds was lying on that ridge instead of curled behind a rock waiting to die. 3 months earlier, on a dusty forward base with nothing to recommend it but bad coffee and worse weather, Daniel Carter had been watching people the way old soldiers watch people, which is to say constantly and without appearing to do it at all. Carter was 51 years old. He had 31 years in the Army. He had trained snipers on 3 continents, and he had buried more of his own students than he liked to think about. And somewhere in those 3 decades, he had developed an instinct that had nothing to do with marksmanship at all. He could spot the ones who watched. Most people, Carter knew, do not actually watch the world. They move through it. They react to what lands in front of them. But every so often, maybe 1 in 10,000, there is a person whose eyes are always working, always sorting, always asking a silent question about everything they see. Where is the threat? What is out of place? What does this pattern mean? He had noticed it about the young intelligence specialist by accident. A helicopter had come in one afternoon, loud and ordinary, kicking up the usual storm of grit. An every soldier on that flight line had done the natural thing and looked at the helicopter. Every soldier except one. Maya Reynolds had glanced at the aircraft for half a second, confirmed it was friendly, and then turned her eyes to the hills. Carter had watched her do it, and then he had watched her do it again the next day and the day after that. When patrols came back through the gate, she read the soldiers, not the trucks. When a convoy rolled in, her eyes went to the high ground, not the cargo. She did it without knowing she did it. It was not training, it was wiring. So one evening, Daniel Carter had walked up to her at the chow hall with his tray in his hands and sat down across from her, uninvited, and he had said, "You always look at the hills." Maya had looked up startled. Certain. When the birds come in, everybody watches the bird. You watch the hills. Why? She had thought about it, actually thought about it, which he liked. Because the bird can't hurt me, she'd finally said. The hills can. Carter had nodded slowly and eaten a forkful of terrible food and said nothing else for a long moment. Then he'd said the sentence that changed the entire course of her life. You ever fire a rifle at something more than 100 meters out? No, Sergeant Major. You want to... And here is the part that mattered to Carter, the part he would remember later. She did not say yes right away. A younger, greener soldier hungry for glory would have said yes right away. Maya Reynolds had frowned and she had asked, "Why me? I'm a logistics and intel specialist. That's not my job." "I didn't ask what your job was," Carter said. "I asked what you wanted." "I don't know if I want it. I don't even know what it is." "Good answer," Carter said, and he'd meant it. The ones who know exactly what they want are usually the ones who want the picture of it, the medals, the story. You don't strike me as somebody chasing a story. I'm not. Then here's the deal. He leaned forward. I'm not going to order you to do anything, because a person only ever gets good at a hard thing if they choose it themselves. Nobody chooses it for them, so you go think about it. And if you decide you want to learn to see the way, I think you can already half see. You come find me at the range at 0500. If you don't show, I'll never mention it again. Fair. Fair, Sergeant Major. He'd stood up, taken his tray, and paused. For what it's worth, he'd said, the whole base looks at you and sees a support soldier. That's their mistake. Don't let it become yours. And then he'd walked away, and Maya Reynolds had sat alone with her cold food and a decision she had not asked for. She showed up at 0500. Nobody expected her to be any good. She wasn't at first. That is the honest truth, and it matters because the temptation in a story like this one is to pretend the hero was secretly a natural all along. She was not. Her first day on the range was, in her own later words, a disaster. Her shots wandered. Her breathing fought her. She flinched at the recoil like a civilian. There were men on that base, real shooters, who watched a logistics specialist pick up a precision rifle and had to physically turn away to keep from laughing. Carter did not laugh. You're squeezing the whole gun like you hate it, he told her that first morning, crouched at her shoulder. Loosen up. The rifle's not your enemy. The rifle's the only friend you've got out here. Treat it like one. I missed by 2 feet. You missed by 2 feet at 300 meters on your first day with your heart going 140. You know what that tells me? He didn't wait for her to answer. It tells me you missed. That's all it tells me. It doesn't tell me you can't. Now do it again. Sergeant Major, maybe I'm not. Again. She did it again. She missed again. And the thing that Daniel Carter saw in that moment, the thing that made him decide to keep coming back to that range at 0500 every single morning, well, for weeks, was that Maya Reynolds did not get discouraged the way other people got discouraged. She got curious. Why did that one go left? She asked after the third miss. You tell me. She sat back and thought. I pulled right before the shot. I anticipated it. That's right. So if I stop anticipating it, then you'll pull it somewhere else and we'll fix that too. He almost smiled. Every mistake is just information, Reynolds. You already know that. You've been doing it with numbers your whole life. Bad report comes across your desk. You don't cry about it. You find the error and you fix it. This is the same thing. The rifle is just a report that shoots back. Something shifted in her at that. He watched it happen. The framing landed somewhere deep in the part of her that had spent a childhood in rural Montana, being taught by a hard, patient father that every problem had a pattern and every solution required waiting. Her father. That was the other thing Carter didn't know yet, but would come to understand. Maya had grown up on a small ranch in a hard part of Montana, the kind of place where a mistake with an animal or a machine or the weather could cost you everything, and where her father had drilled into her before she was 10 years old, that you do not panic, you do not rush. You look at the thing until you understand the thing, and then you act once correctly. Slow is smooth, her father used to say, wiping his hands on a rag, and smooth is what keeps you alive. She had hated it as a girl. She understood it as a woman lying on a ridge above a dying SEAL team with a rifle in her hands and a machine gun 60 meters from opening up on the only friend she had in the world. Because that was the situation right now in the present in the black of that valley. Let us return to it because it has not paused for our history lesson. It never does. Down below her, Ryan Walker could not lift his rifle. Ethan Cole was out of answers. The enemy machine gun on the left shoulder was traversing its gunner walking rounds closer and closer to the rocks where 6 exhausted men were pressed flat with almost no ammunition between them. And in the open ground, the commander named Rashid still had his boot near young Torres, still confident, still certain, still reading the American faces for the fear he had read in 1,000 faces before. Maya Reynolds had been watching all of it through the small optic on her carbine. She had been watching for 2 full minutes without moving, which does not sound like a long time, but 2 minutes of holding still while the men below you are being killed is the longest span of time a human being can experience. Every cell in her body was screaming to do something, anything now. And the voice of Daniel Carter, and behind it the voice of her father, was saying the same 3 words over and over. Look, understand, she wasn't going to waste her first shot. She understood with a clarity that surprised her that she might only get one. The moment she fired, she stopped being a ghost on the ridge and started being a target, and there were 40 of them and one of her. So the first shot had to count for more than one man. It had to change the shape of the whole fight. The machine gun, it had to be the machine gun. She could not reach it with the carbine. Not reliably, not at this range, not in the dark. She had known that for 90 seconds now, and 90 seconds ago, she had started crawling slowly, agonizingly toward the one thing in that valley that could reach it. Ryan Walker's rifle. He had dropped it when he was hit. It lay in a shallow trough of rock and scree, maybe 8 meters from where the sniper now bled closer to Maya's position than to any of the SEALs. She had watched it fall. She had marked exactly where it landed. And she had begun inch by inch to close the distance, moving in the 2-second windows when the machine gun's chatter and the general roar of the firefight would cover the small sounds she made. She reached it as the gunner below found his rhythm. The rifle was warm, heavier than what she'd trained on a different platform, but not so different that her hands didn't know it. She had spent 3 months with a weapon very much like this one because Daniel Carter had insisted she train on the real thing, not a toy. The day you need it, he'd told her, you won't get to choose which rifle's lying in the dirt, so learn them all. She had thought that was paranoid. She now understood it was mercy. She pulled the rifle in against her shoulder, found the optic, and for one terrible instant, the whole world was a smear of black and noise, and she could not find anything at all. Her heart was at 160. Her hands were shaking. Every doubt she'd ever had about herself arrived at once, a chorus of them. You're an analyst. You're a support soldier. You don't belong here. You're going to miss, and they're going to die, and it will be your fault. And then out of the noise came Carter's voice. Not a memory of it. It was almost as if the man were lying beside her, mouth at her ear, the way he had lain beside her for 3 months of cold mornings. Breathe out, Reynolds. You don't shoot on the hell breath. You shoot in the pause after it when your body's got nothing left to move. Find the pause. Live in the pause. She breathed out. The shaking did not stop, but it slowed. The smear resolved. She found the muzzle flash of the machine gun, a rhythmic bloom on the left shoulder of the valley, and she found the shape crouched behind it, and she began to do the only thing she truly knew how to do, the thing she had done her whole life with numbers and maps and reports. She turned chaos into a problem. Range. Call it 420. The scope was set for something else. She had no time to dial, she would have to hold. Wind. She had felt it on her cheek, walking in a light left to right push funneling down the valley. She'd noted it without meaning to, the way she noted everything. Elevation. The gunner was above her. She'd have to account for the angle. Movement. He was static firing, married to his gun, which meant he would not move, which meant he was already, in a sense, dead. He just didn't know it yet. Every problem has a pattern, her father said. Every mistake is just information, Carter said. Maya Reynolds settled the reticle high and, left of the crouched gunner, let her lungs empty, found the pause, the still silent pause, where her body had nothing left to betray her with, and in that pause, for the first time in her life, She made the decision that a sniper is actually paid to make, not the decision to shoot. Anyone can decide to shoot. The decision to be the one who is responsible for what happens next. The decision to carry it. She was ready. Not because she was brave, though she was. Not because she was lucky, though she would need to be. She was ready because a 51-year-old man had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself. And because a hard Montana father had taught her patience before she could spell the word, and because for 3 cold months she had chosen every single morning to walk to that range and fail and learn and fail again. She was ready because she had prepared when no one was watching. Down in the valley, Rashid, the commander, turned toward the machine gun and lifted his arm to signal the final push, the surge that would overrun the rocks and finish the 6 pinned Americans and the 2 on the ground. He was smiling. He had seen this moment 100 times. He knew exactly how it ended. He was wrong about one thing. He was wrong about how many people were in that valley. Maya Reynolds' fingers settled on the trigger, and Daniel Carter's last lesson moved through her mind like a slow tide, the thing he had told her on their final morning together when he'd shaken her hand and told her she was ready and she had not believed him. You're going to spend the whole fight, he'd said, waiting to feel ready. You never will. Readiness isn't a feeling, Reynolds. It's a fact you build in the dark long before anybody needs it. When the moment comes, you won't feel like a sniper. You'll feel like a scared kid holding a rifle. That's fine. That's normal. You do it anyway. You do it because you built the fact, and the fact doesn't care how you feel. I built the fact, she thought. Below her, Ethan Cole heard Rashid's voice rise into the command that would kill them all, and he did the only thing a leader has left when he is out of everything else. He grabbed the man nearest him, Reyes, and he said quietly, "It's been an honor." And he reached for a rifle with no rounds in it because a man does not die on his stomach if he can die on his feet. "Cap," Reyes whispered. "Cap, wait. You hear that?" "Hear what?" Everything stopped. And it had. For one impossible sliver of a second, the whole valley seemed to hold its breath. The machine gun paused between belts. Rashid's shout hung unfinished in the cold air. Even the wind seemed to still that light, left to right, push that a young analyst had noted 2 hours before without knowing why it would ever matter. In that silence, 420 meters up a ridge that the enemy did not know was occupied a woman, that no one on that team had truly seen a woman. They had walked past and half smiled at and dismissed as just another support soldier, emptied her lungs, lived in the pause and made a decision she would carry for the rest of her life. The last thing Rashid, the commander, ever saw was his own machine gunner, 60 meters away, suddenly and violently stop firing. He did not understand it. There had been no muzzle flash. He could see, no sound he could place, no enemy where an enemy could be. His gun, his beautiful, reliable gun that had never failed him in 19 years of these mountains, had simply gone silent, and the man behind it had simply folded. And for the first time in a very long time, Rashid felt something move in his stomach that he had spent 2 decades teaching himself to forget. He felt the ground change beneath his certainty. He looked up at the ridgelines he had cleared the high ground. He had taken the overwatch he had eliminated before the Americans even knew they were in a fight. He had accounted for everything. He had planned this for weeks. He had left them no direction that was not the wrong direction. But there was one thing Rashid, the commander, had never accounted for because it had never occurred to him that it was possible because in his entire war, it had never once been true. He had never accounted for the person nobody was watching. Up on the ridge, Maya Reynolds worked the bolt, found the pause again and searched the darkness for the next problem to solve. Her hands had almost stopped shaking. Her heart impossibly was slowing. Somewhere far down inside her, beneath the fear and the noise and the enormous weight of what she had just done, a single quiet thought was forming in her father's voice and Carter's voice, in a voice that was finally for the first time her own. Slow is smooth, and smooth is what keeps them alive. Below her, the men she had come to observe, the men who had never learned her name, began slowly to understand that the fight had just changed. They did not yet know how. They did not yet know who. They only knew that the machine gun that should have killed them had gone quiet and that the enemy, for the first time all night, had stopped moving forward. Ethan Cole lowered the empty rifle he had picked up to die with. "Somebody's up there," he breathed. "Somebody's shooting for us." He did not know it was Maya Reynolds. He did not know that the analyst he'd nodded at exactly twice in 3 days, The Army specialist he'd let tag along to look at boxes, was at that moment the only thing standing between his entire team and the dirt. He did not know that within the next 11 minutes, everything he believed about who is dangerous and who is not, about who saves and who is saved, about who deserves to be watched and who deserves to be overlooked, was going to be broken apart and rebuilt in the dark of a valley on the Afghanistan border. He only knew that hope, which he had let go of completely 30 seconds before, had come back into the valley from a direction the enemy had never covered. And it had come in on a single perfect impossible shot. Rashid dropped low behind cover, screaming at his men to find the shooter, to find the ridge, to find the ghost that had just torn the heart out of his ambush. Fighters swung their weapons wildly at the dark hillsides, firing at shadows, firing at rocks, firing at nothing, because the one thing they could not do was find the small, still, patient shape that had already chosen its next target and was breathing out and living in the pause and turning their fear into a problem she knew exactly how to solve. She fired again. Another gun went silent, and in the rocks below, 6 exhausted, half-beaten, nearly finished American operators lifted their heads, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they began to believe that they might just walk out of that valley alive, saved by the last soldier on earth. Any of them had thought to notice the woman they had never seen coming, the woman behind the rifle. Her name was Maya Reynolds, and the enemy had made one mistake that no plan, no ambush, and no amount of certainty could ever undo. They had counted 40 fighters and 8 Americans. They had forgotten to count her. The second gun going silent did something to Rashid that 19 years of war had never done. It made him afraid, and worse, it made his men see him afraid. "Find it!" he screamed, pressed low behind a boulder that suddenly felt very small. "Find the shooter. It is one man on the hill. Find him and kill him, and this is over." But it was not over, and some part of Rashid already knew it was not over because the shots were coming from a place that could not have a shooter in it. He had cleared those ridges. He had put his own men on the high ground before the Americans ever entered the valley. The overwatch had been eliminated. The trap had been perfect. And a perfect trap does not turn around and start eating the people who set it. Up on the ridge, Maya Reynolds heard the screaming below her without understanding a word of it, and she did not need to understand it. She could read the shape of it. She had spent 11 months reading the shape of the enemy from 1,000 miles away, and now she was reading him from 400 meters, and the shape said the same thing a bad report always said. Something is wrong here, and the man in charge does not yet know how wrong. She worked the bolt. She did not celebrate. She had learned that from Carter too. You don't watch your own shot, Lan Reynolds. You watch for the next problem. The shot that already happened can't hurt anybody. It's the next one that keeps them alive. So she did not look at the gunners she had stopped. She looked at the men who were still moving, and she began the way she had always begun to sort them. Down in the rocks, Ethan Cole was doing the same math from the other end. Reyes, his voice was low and fast. 2 guns just went quiet, the PK on the left shoulder and something on the right. I heard it, Cap. That's not luck. That's a shooter picking his targets. That's somebody who knows exactly what to kill first. Kowalski crawled up beside them, his big shoulders scraping rock. Overwatch team's dead, sir. That's not them. I know it's not them. Then who the hell is up there? And Ethan Cole, who had led men for a decade and prided himself on always having the answer, opened his mouth and had none. Because the honest answer, the answer that was already forming somewhere in the back of his mind, and that he was not yet willing to say out loud, was so unlikely that saying it felt like surrender to hope, and hope on a battlefield can get a man killed faster than despair. Torres, he said instead. Where's Torres? Still down, still in the open. Reyes' jaw was tight. But nobody's on him right now, Cap. The guy who had him ran for cover when the shooting started. Torres is alive. He's crawling. Tell him to hold. Tell him not to move till I say. How we got no comms with him. He's 40 meters out in the open. Ethan swore under his breath. And in that exact moment, as if the universe had decided to answer his question, in the cruelest possible way, the enemy on the right flank found their courage again and surged. It came in a wave, the way these things always come. 6 or 7 fighters breaking from cover at once, screaming weapons up, closing the gap toward the rocks, where the SEALs had almost nothing left to stop them with. Ethan raised a rifle he had scavenged 4 rounds for. Kowalski came up beside him. Reyes was already firing short and disciplined, making every round count. But 4 men with a handful of bullets against 7 charging fighters is not a fight, it is an arithmetic problem. And the arithmetic said they were going to be overrun in the next 10 seconds. "Contact right!" Ethan roared. "Contact right! They're on us!" 2 of the SEALs' rounds found targets. 2 fighters dropped. That left 5, and 5 was enough. 5 was more than enough, and Ethan Cole understood in that heartbeat that the shooter on the ridge, whoever they were, was about to matter for nothing, because the shooter was working the flanks and the guns, and the shooter could not possibly react fast enough to a close assault coming from a completely different direction. The shooter reacted, the lead fighter in the surge, the one closest to the rocks, the one whose momentum would have carried him right into Reyes' position. In another 2 seconds went down mid-stride, folding sideways, and the fighter behind him stumbled over the body, and the whole surge lost its shape in an instant. Its rhythm broken, its screaming turning from rage into confusion. Up on the ridge, Maya Reynolds was already tracking the next one. She had seen the surge start. She had seen it a full second before Ethan Cole saw it, because she was above it, because she had chosen a position that let her see the whole valley floor, because a young analyst who studied ambush terrain for fun had picked her hide not for comfort, but for angles. She had felt the fear rise in her chest when the fighters broke cover, the same fear as before, the cold flood of, "You can't do this fast enough." And she had done the only thing she knew to do with fear. She had turned it into a range estimate. 260 meters. Closing, left to right movement fast. Lead the target, her father cutting a running coyote out of the herd's path with a rifle when she was 12 years old, his voice flat and calm. "You don't shoot where he is, Maya. You shoot where he's going to be. Shoot the future, not the present." She shot the future. The lead fighter ran into the place, her bullet was already waiting, and he fell, and the surge came apart, and 6 exhausted Americans who had been 2 seconds from being overrun suddenly had 2 seconds back. And on a battlefield, 2 seconds is not nothing. 2 seconds is everything. 2 seconds is the difference between a funeral and a reunion. "Somebody's covering us," Reyes shouted, and there was something breaking open in his voice, something that had been clamped down all night. "Cap, somebody up there is covering our whole line." They dropped the point man. They dropped him clean. Ethan Cole looked up at the black ridge above them, the ridge with no shooter in it, the ridge he could not explain, and he made a decision. Not about the enemy, about hope. He decided to let it back in. "All right," he said, and his voice changed, hardened, found its footing again. "All right, we got an angel on the hill. I don't know who and I don't know how, but somebody up there is buying us time, and I'll be damned if we waste it. Reyes, get to Ryan. Kowalski, get eyes on Torres. We are not dying in this valley. Not tonight." Ryan Walker, the wounded sniper. He was still on his back in the rocks, one hand pressed to his side, and when Reyes crawled to him, Ryan grabbed his sleeve with a bloody hand and asked the question that was tearing him apart. "My rifle. Where's my rifle?" "You dropped it, brother, when you got hit." "No." Ryan's eyes were wild. "No, listen to me. Where did it go? Somebody's shooting. Somebody's making shots I couldn't make on my best day. Whose rifle are they using?" Reyes went still, because there had been exactly one long gun in that valley, Ryan Walker's. The rest of them carried carbines, close-range weapons, and a carbine did not make a 400-meter shot in the dark that dropped a machine gunner behind his gun. That kind of shot needed Ryan's rifle, and Ryan's rifle was gone, and Ryan was here on his back, unable to lift it. "Somebody picked up your gun," Reyes said slowly. "Somebody picked up my gun," Ryan repeated, "and they're shooting better than me." Neither of them said the name. Neither of them had the name yet. But a thought was moving through the team, now low and electric, passing from man to man, the way understanding passes through people who have trained together for years and can read each other in the dark. There was an 8th American in this valley. There was the analyst. There was the army girl nobody had watched. Up on the ridge, Maya Reynolds did not know they were beginning to guess. She did not know anything except the next problem, and the next problem was Rashid. She had found him a minute ago. She had watched the shape of the man who commanded them. The one the others looked to, the one who screamed and pointed and drove the fighters forward. She had learned in 11 months of analysis that you do not win a fight like this by killing soldiers. You win it by killing the thing that holds the soldiers together. Cut the head and the body forgets how to move. She had him in her scope now. She had had him on and off for 90 seconds, and she had not fired. This is the part of the story that people who have never carried a rifle find hardest to understand. She had a clean shot at the enemy commander, the man responsible for the whole trap, the man who had stood over her comrade with a boot on his chest, and she did not take it. Not out of mercy, out of arithmetic. Because Rashid was smart, and Rashid had gone to ground, and Rashid only exposed himself for a fraction of a second at a time, darting between cover to rally his men. A shot at Rashid was a low percentage shot, and a low percentage shot at the commander meant a wasted round in a revealed position, in a machine gunner, or a mortar team that got to keep breathing while she gambled. Carter's voice cold and clear. Don't take the shot you want, Reynolds. Take the shot you'll make. Ego is what fills body bags. So she left Rashid alone, and she went back to the guns, and she went back to the men closing on her friends. And she waited for the commander to make the mistake that men in command always eventually make, which is to believe that because they are giving the orders, the bullets will respect their importance. It was now, by Ethan Cole's later reckoning, about 4 minutes into a fight that would last 11. 4 minutes. It had felt like 4 hours. And in those 4 minutes, the entire momentum of the battle had begun impossibly to turn, and not one man on that SEAL team could have told you the name of the person turning it. But one of them was about to learn it. Kowalski had crawled toward Torres. Torres, the 19-year-old who had grabbed a gun barrel out of his own face and started the whole firefight, was low, crawling back toward the rocks with a wound in his thigh and terror in his chest. And Kowalski was talking him in low and steady, the way you talk a spooked animal down. You're good, kid. You're almost home. Keep coming. I got you. And then a fighter Kowalski had not seen rose up from a fold in the ground, 15 meters from Torres' weapon, leveled close enough that he could not miss. And Kowalski screamed Torres' name and brought his own rifle up, knowing he was too slow, knowing he was a half second behind, knowing the kid was about to die 15 meters from home. The fighter's head snapped back before Kowalski's finger touched the trigger. Kowalski froze. He looked at the dead man. He looked at Torres alive, still crawling, unaware how close it had just been. And then slowly Kowalski turned his head and looked up at the ridge, the black, empty ridge 400 meters away, and something happened in the big man's chest that he would never quite be able to describe for the rest of his life. She's watching all of us, he whispered. At the same time. She's watching every single one of us at the same time. Because Kowalski of all of them knew. Kowalski had walked up that valley beside her. Kowalski had heard her say quietly, "This ground makes me nervous. This looks like the pictures." Kowalski had smiled at her, the way you smile at a tourist, and asked her what she knew about nervous ground from behind a computer. And now Kowalski was lying in the dirt with his life and the kid's life both hanging by a thread, and the thread was being held by the woman he had smiled at, the woman he had dismissed, the analyst who had told him this was an ambush before it was an ambush and been ignored. "Kowalski," Ethan's voice sharp, "talk to me. Who's on the hill?" Kowalski crawled backward toward his captain, dragging Torres the last few meters into the cover of the rocks. And when he got there, when the kid was safe and gasping and alive, he looked at Ethan Cole and he said it out loud, the thing none of them had let themselves believe. "It's Reynolds' Cap." Ethan stared at him. "What?" "The Army specialist, the intel girl. It's Reynolds. She's up there with Ryan's gun." Kowalski's voice cracked. "She told me, on the way in, she told me it was an ambush. She read it off the ground, and I laughed at her, and I kept walking. Cap, she called this whole thing, and now she's up on that ridge saving our lives, and I don't even know if I ever said her first name out loud." For a moment in the middle of a firefight, in a valley on the edge of the world, Captain Ethan Cole was completely silent. He was remembering her. He was pulling up every fragment of the last 3 days and looking at them again in a new and terrible light. The quiet woman with the maps, the one who tried to say something during the mission briefing and been talked over, the one he'd nodded at twice and never really seen. He had looked right at her a dozen times and seen a support soldier, a tag-along, a box checker. He had seen a task, not a person. And she was on the ridge with a dead man's rifle keeping his entire team alive. "My God," Ethan said quietly, and then louder to his men with something new and fierce in his voice. "Listen up. The shooter on the hill is one of ours. It's Specialist Reynolds. She is buying us time with every round, and we are going to use it. Ryan, can you talk?" "Ryan." "I can talk." The sniper's voice was thin. You trained with her. Kowalski says she's got your gun. A strange sound came out of Ryan Walker, half laugh and half sob. No, I never trained her. I never even talked to her. He coughed. But I know who did. There's only one man on that whole base who'd take a logistics specialist and turn her into that. Carter. Sergeant Major Carter. That old man's been collecting strays and making shooters out of them for 30 years. Ryan's head fell back against the rock. He found her. He actually found her. And nobody believed him. Up on the ridge, the woman they were finally at last learning to see had no idea that 400 meters away, 6 men were speaking her name for the first time like it meant something. She was somewhere else entirely. She was in the place Carter had taught her to go, the still cold place behind her own fear, and she was working. 12 minutes, her father used to say, is how long a hard thing takes. Not because 12 minutes is magic, because most people quit at 10. You get past 10, you get past the place where everybody else stops, and the last 2 minutes are yours alone. She did not know why that thought came to her now. She only knew that she was somewhere past the place where the old Maya, the analyst, the support soldier, the woman who watched the hills because she was afraid of them, would have stopped. She had gone past that woman minutes ago. She did not know who she was now. She only knew what she was doing, and she was doing it well, and the men below her were still alive because of it. And then the enemy did the thing she had been waiting for. The thing that changes every fight like this one. They stopped charging and they started thinking, and a thinking enemy is a far more dangerous enemy than a charging one. Rashid had figured out the ridge. He had done it the way she would have done it, by watching the timing of the shots and back walking the angles, by realizing that every fighter who fell was falling in a way that pointed to one specific fold of high ground on the northern wall of the valley. He could not see the shooter, but he had found the shooter's house. And now he was doing what any competent commander does when he locates a sniper he cannot see. He was going to bury the house. Mortars, Ethan said, and the word landed in the rocks like a stone in a still pond. He had heard the distinctive sound, the hollow metallic cough from the far end of the valley, the sound every ground soldier learns to fear more than any rifle. They've got a tube. They're ranging the ridge. Reynolds, they're ranging Reynolds. There was no way to warn her. No comms, no line of sight to signal. 400 meters of open air and enemy fire between the SEAL team and the woman who had just spent 5 minutes saving all their lives. And now she was about to be walked over by mortar fire, and there was not one single thing any of them could do about it. We gotta do something, Reyes said. We can't just lie here and watch them drop rounds on her. What do you want to do? Ethan's voice was raw. You want to run 400 meters through 40 guns to tell her to move. She'll be dead before you're halfway there. We'll all be dead. So we do nothing. She's up there because of us, Cap. She's up there dying for us, and we do nothing. Ethan had no answer. It was the second time that night the universe had asked him a question he could not answer, and this one was worse than the first, because this time the person paying the price was a woman who had never asked for any of it, who was supposed to look at boxes and take notes, who had ended up with a dead man's rifle in her hands because she was the only one left who could use it. The first mortar round left the tube. Up on the ridge, Maya heard it. Of course she heard it. She had spent 11 months studying the enemy, and part of studying an enemy is learning the sounds they make, and she knew the cough of a mortar the way she knew her own name. She knew what it meant. She knew in the 2 or 3 seconds of flight time, she had exactly what was coming and exactly who it was coming for. And here's the thing that Daniel Carter had built into her, the fact he had made in the dark long before anyone needed it. She did not panic. She did not freeze. In the 2 seconds she had, she did the calculation that a panicked person can never do, the calculation that only comes from a mind that has been trained to stay cold when the body wants to run. She figured out where the round was going to land, not by magic, by math, by the angle of the tube's cough, by the direction of the valley, by the position she knew she was in, and the position a competent enemy would range first. She figured out that the first round, the ranging round, would land long past her, because that is how mortar teams range. They bracket, they walk it in, and the first one almost always goes long. So she did not run backward away from the impact the way every instinct screamed at her to. She ran forward, toward the enemy, down the slope into a new fold of rock she had marked an hour ago, the way she marked everything, and the ranging round came down exactly where she had calculated it would on the hide she had just abandoned. And the blast threw dirt and rock over her back as she pressed into her new position, alive, moving, already finding the scope, already looking for the next problem. Down in the valley, the SEAL team saw the flash of the impact on the ridge, and for one horrible heartbeat, 6 men were certain she was dead. "No," Kowalski said. "No, no, no." And then from a different part of the ridge, 100 meters from the impact, a rifle fired, and the mortar crew's spotter, the man standing tall to observe the fall of his own round, dropped where he stood. She had moved. She had lived, and she had used the enemy's own attempt to kill her to make them expose the man who was trying. Kowalski started laughing. It was not a sane laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has watched something he cannot believe. "She moved before it hit," he said. "She knew where it was going to land, and she moved before it hit, and then she killed the guy who called it." Cap, who is this woman? Ethan Cole did not laugh. Ethan Cole felt something closer to reverence and something closer to shame because he was the commander. He was the one who was supposed to see everything and everyone, and he had walked past her for 3 days and seen nothing. "She's the best soldier in this valley," he said quietly, "and I never learned her name." The mortar tube coughed again, adjusting, and Maya moved again, and the round fell where she had been and not where she was, and a pattern began to establish itself, a deadly dance between a woman who could think faster than an enemy could aim, and an enemy who was beginning round by round to run out of ideas. But the enemy had numbers, and numbers buy time, and time was the one thing that could still kill her, because a person can only move so many times, can only calculate so many arcs, can only stay cold for so long before the body finally wins and the fear finally floods in and the hands finally shake at the wrong moment. She knew that. She knew she could not do this forever. She knew that every minute that passed was a minute closer to the mistake that would end her, and she knew with the clear, cold certainty of a mind that had already accepted the weight of the rifle that the only way out of this valley for anyone was to end the fight before her own limits ended her, which meant she had to do the things she had been avoiding. She had to take the low percentage shot. She had to kill Rashid. She found him again in the scope, moving between his men, directing the mortar, rallying the fighters, holding the whole broken thing together by force of will. She understood him now the way she understood everything, by watching, by sorting, by finding the pattern. And the pattern of Rashid was that he was brave, and being brave was going to be the death of him, because a brave commander exposes himself to lead, and a man who exposes himself to lead gives a patient shooter a window. She just had to wait for the window. Carter's voice one more time from a cold morning 3 months and a lifetime ago. The hardest shot in the world, Reynolds, isn't the far one. It's the one where you have to wait for it while everything in you screams to take it early. Patience is the shot. The trigger is just the end of it. She breathed out. She lived in the pause. She watched the man who had stood over her comrade with a boot on his chest, the man who had been so certain, so sure, so completely convinced that he had already won, and she waited for him to believe one more time that the bullets would respect his importance. Down in the rocks, Ethan Cole watched the ridge and watched the enemy commander moving in the open, and without knowing he was doing it, without any way for her to hear him, he began to whisper. "Take him," he breathed. "Whoever you are, wherever you came from, whatever they turned you into, take him. End this. Bring us home." And 400 meters away on a ridge, the enemy thought they had cleared in a valley. The enemy thought they had sealed the woman. Nobody had watched the analyst. Nobody had named the soldier. Everyone had walked past, settled her reticle on the head of the man who had been certain he'd already won, and got ready to prove him wrong one final time. She had the shot, and then she didn't take it. Because in the half second before her finger closed, Rashid dropped, not from a bullet, but because he was smart, because he had learned in 19 years of these mountains that a man who stands still is a man who dies. And some animal instinct in him had felt the crosshairs, the way prey feels the shadow of the hawk. He folded behind a slab of rock, and Maya Reynolds' window closed, and she let the pause end without firing. And she did not curse, and she did not slam her fist, and she did not do any of the things a lesser shooter would have done. She simply started waiting again. That was the thing about her that no one on that base had ever understood, the thing Daniel Carter had seen and everyone else had missed. Most people experience waiting as suffering. For Maya, waiting was working. The rifle was still. Her breath was slow, and her mind that strange, cold engine that had spent a childhood sorting problems on a hard Montana ranch, and 11 months sorting them behind a computer screen, kept turning over the same question it always turned over. What is the pattern? Where is he going? What does he do next? Rashid behind his rock was asking the same question about her. 5 minutes into a fight that would last 11, the two smartest people in that valley had found each other without ever seeing each other's faces, and they had begun to play a game that only one of them would walk away from. He's gone to ground, Cap. Down in the rocks, Reyes was watching the enemy commander disappear. She almost had him. I swear, she almost had him. He dropped like he felt it coming. He did feel it coming, Ethan said. That's a man who's survived 100 of these. He's not going to give her a clean look twice. He wiped grit from his eyes, which means she's gonna have to make him move. She's gonna have to force it. How does one shooter force a commander with 40 men to do anything? Ethan didn't answer because up on the ridge, Maya had already begun to do exactly that. And the answer was so simple and so brutal that Ethan would not fully understand it until it was over. She stopped shooting at the men near Rashid. She started shooting at the men far from him. She worked the far flank, the fighters on the eastern wall, methodically, patiently, one and then another. And to the enemy on the ground, it looked like the ghost on the ridge had shifted her attention, had lost interest in the center, had turned her guns on the edges, which meant to Rashid that the center was momentarily safe, which meant that Rashid, who needed to rally his eastern flank before it collapsed, who could not command men he could not reach, began to move toward the very fighters she was killing. Because that is what a commander does. He goes to the crisis. He goes to the place that is breaking. She was not shooting at the flank. She was building a road. And she was driving Rashid down it one body at a time toward a piece of open ground she had already ranged, already dialed, and already decided would be the place he died. Down below, Ryan Walker, flat on his back and bleeding, was the one who figured it out. Snipers understand other snipers. She's hurting him, he breathed. Cap, listen. She's not missing the center. She's giving up the center on purpose. She's killing the east flank to pull him east. She's driving him to a spot. His voice was full of something like awe. That's not a shooter. That's a hunter. Carter didn't make her a marksman. He made her a predator, and she doesn't even know it. How long, Ethan said. How long till she gets him where she wants him? I don't know. A minute? 2? But Cap. Ryan grabbed his arm. She doesn't have 2 minutes. Listen. And Ethan listened, and beneath the crack of rifles and the screaming of wounded men, he heard the thing Ryan had heard, the thing that changed the arithmetic all over again. The mortar tube had stopped ranging the ridge. It had gone quiet. And a mortar tube goes quiet for exactly one reason. Because it has finally found its target and is about to fire for effect. They had her. Somewhere in the last 30 seconds, the enemy mortar crew had finally walked their rounds close enough, had finally read the pattern of her movement, had finally figured out not where she was, but where she kept going, and they were about to saturate that whole section of ridge with everything they had. She's got to move, Reyes said. She's got to move right now. But moving right now meant abandoning the road she was building. Moving right now meant letting Rashid off the hook. Moving right now meant surviving this minute at the cost of every minute after it, because as long as Rashid lived, the fight went on. And the longer the fight went on, the more certain it became that one of these mortar rounds would eventually find her, no matter how well she moved. She knew all of it. 400 meters away, alone with a dead man's rifle and an enemy closing in from 2 directions at once, Maya Reynolds understood the trap she was in with total clarity. And she made a choice that Ethan Cole would spend the rest of his life trying to describe to people who had not been there. She stayed. She heard the tube go quiet. She knew what it meant. And she decided that killing Rashid was worth more than saving herself, because killing Rashid saved 7 other people. And she had done the math. And the math said 1 life against 7, and she had already accepted the weight of the rifle. And the weight of the rifle is exactly this. It is the willingness to be the one who stays. She's not moving, Kowalski said, and his voice broke on the words. Cap, she knows the mortars are coming, and she's not moving. What is she doing? What is she doing? She's finishing it, Ryan said quietly. She's going to finish it, or she's going to die trying. Both at once, maybe. And Ethan Cole, who had told his men 30 seconds ago that there was nothing they could do, who had watched the universe ask him unanswerable questions all night, finally completely ran out of his willingness to lie on the rocks and watch a woman die for him. No, he said. No, not like this. Cap, she's not dying alone up there while we hide. That's not who we are. He was already moving, checking the 4 rounds in his scavenged rifle, his whole body coming up off the ground. Ryan, can you shoot at all? One arm, anything. I can maybe hold a carbine. I can't hit anything past 50 meters. I don't need you to hit anything. I need you to make noise. I need the enemy to think the fight just doubled. Ethan looked at his men, the exhausted, half-beaten, nearly out of ammunition remnants of a SEAL team that had walked into a valley to die, and he said the thing that turns a group of survivors back into soldiers. She's been fighting for us for 6 minutes, and we've done nothing but watch. We are done watching. We are going to make so much noise down here that every gun in this valley forgets there's a shooter on that hill. We are going to buy her the same thing she's been buying us. Time. On my go. That's suicide, Cap. But Reyes was smiling when he said it, the terrible, glad smile of a man who would rather die on his feet doing something than live on his belly doing nothing. Then we do it loud, Ethan said. Go. And 6 exhausted Americans rose up out of the rocks and did the most tactically insane thing they could have done, which was to attack. They opened up with everything they had left. They screamed, they shifted, they made themselves look like 10 men, 20 a relief force, a counterattack, and for 3 or 4 precious seconds, the entire enemy line turned back toward the center, toward the noise, toward the SEALs, who were supposed to already be dead and were instead standing up and coming forward. Rashid turned with them, for one instant, distracted by the impossible sight of a beaten enemy. Rising to attack the enemy, Commander stepped clear of his rock into the open ground on the eastern flank, into the exact patch of earth that a woman on the ridge had ranged and dialed and been building a road toward for the last 90 seconds, and he lifted his arm to order his men to hold steady, to cut the Americans down. He never gave the order. Up on the ridge in the last breath before the mortars fell, Maya Reynolds saw the window open. She did not celebrate. She did not hesitate. She had waited 6 minutes and killed 9 men and built a road out of bodies for this exact half second. And when it came, she was already there, still living in the pause. And she did the thing Carter had built into her in the dark long before anyone needed it. She breathed out and she took the shot she had earned. Rashid, commander of 40 men, veteran of 19 years in these mountains, the man who had stood over a wounded American with a boot on his chest and been so completely certain that he had already won, fell in the open ground on the eastern wall of a valley. He had turned into a trap, killed by a soldier. He had never counted from a direction he had cleared with a rifle that belonged to a man he had already shot. And then the mortars came down on the ridge. Down in the valley, the SEAL team saw 2 things happen in the same half second, and for the rest of their lives, none of them would ever be able to decide which one they saw first. They saw the enemy commander drop in the open, and they saw the entire section of ridge where their shooter had been erupt in fire and smoke and flying rock as the mortar crew finally fired for effect, 4 rounds, 5 walking across the high ground in a wall of destruction that no human being could have survived. No, Kowalski screamed. No. The valley went strange and quiet in the way a battlefield goes quiet when both sides lose the thing that was driving them. The enemy had lost Rashid. The Americans had lost, they believed, the woman who had saved them. The fighters on the ground, leaderless, now uncertain, no longer hearing the voice that had held them together, began to falter, began to look at each other, began to feel the fight slipping through their fingers. But Ethan Cole was not looking at the enemy. Ethan Cole was staring at the burning ridge, at the smoke where Maya Reynolds had been, and he was feeling a grief so sudden and so total that it did not feel like grief at all. It felt like a mistake, like a thing that could still be taken back if he just refused hard enough to accept it. Get up, he said to the smoke. Get up. Come on. Get up. Cap. Reyes's hand was on his shoulder. Cap, we gotta move. They're leaderless. This is our window. We gotta break contact and get to high ground and call the birds. She's up there. Cap. She's up there, Reyes. She stayed for us. She stayed knowing they were gonna drop that on her, and she killed him anyway. And she's up there. Ethan's voice was not the voice of a captain anymore. It was the voice of a man who had walked past someone for 3 days and was only now too late understanding what he had walked past. We are not leaving her on that ridge. Do you understand me? We do not leave her. And that is when they heard it. Faint from the smoke from the shattered rock of a ridge that no one could have survived a single rifle fired. One shot, and a fighter on the valley floor, one of the men who had been creeping forward to finish the SEALs while they grieved, dropped where he stood. Every head on that team snapped up. "That's her gun," Ryan whispered. He was weeping and he did not know it. "That's Ryan Walker's gun, and I am Ryan Walker, and I am down here, which means she is up there, which means she is alive. Cap, she's alive. She rode out the mortars, and she is still up there, and she is still working." She had moved. In the seconds after her shot on Rashid in the flight time of the mortar rounds, she had heard coming, she had done the last thing anyone expected. The thing that only made sense to a mind that stayed cold when every other mind broke. She had not stayed to see Rashid fall. She had killed him and moved in the same motion, sliding down and along the ridge to a fold of rock she had marked an hour ago, so that when the mortars came down on the place she had been, she was already 50 meters away, pressed into the earth, her ears ringing dirt, raining down on her back alive. And now from her new position, half-deaf hands, shaking heart, hammering at a rate that should not have allowed any shot at all, she was still doing the only thing she knew how to do. She was watching the men who were still trying to kill her friends, and she was one at a time, patiently, methodically, in her father's slow, smooth rhythm, taking them off the board. "She's alive," Kowalski kept saying, laughing and crying at once, a big man come completely undone. "She's alive, she's alive. That crazy, magnificent woman is alive." Ethan Cole closed his eyes for 1 second, one single second, and let the relief move through him, like heat through frozen hands. And then he opened them because he was a captain, and his shooter had just handed him the whole battle on a plate, and it would dishonor everything she had done to waste it. "All right," he said, and the command was back in his voice, hardened now, forged in something it had not contained an hour ago. "Their commander's down. They're leaderless. They're wavering. And we have got the best shooter in Afghanistan covering our movement from that ridge. This is it. This is how we get out. Reyes, Kowalski, you've got Torres and Ryan. We move by pairs to the northern draw. We get to high ground we call the birds. Reynolds covers us the whole way whether she knows we know her name or not." They moved, and she covered them. She covered them the way she had done everything that night, without being asked, without being thanked, without any way of knowing that the men below her had finally at last learned who she was. Every time a fighter rose to fire on the retreating SEALs, he fell before he could. Every time the enemy tried to organize a pursuit, the organizing man dropped and the pursuit fell apart. She was half deaf and shaking and running out of the cold place inside her that Carter had built, and she kept shooting and she kept saving them, because that was the weight of the rifle, and she had chosen to carry it, and she would carry it until the last man was safe or until she could not lift it anymore. Down in the draw, as the team consolidated, as Reyes finally got a signal and started screaming coordinates into a radio that had spat nothing but static all night, Ethan Cole looked up one more time at the ridge, at the woman he could not see, and he made himself a promise. If they lived, if the birds came, if he ever stood on solid ground again with this woman in front of him, he was going to learn to see. Not just her, all of them. Every quiet soldier he had ever walked past, every support specialist he had ever checked off a list. Because he had spent his whole career believing he knew what a warrior looked like, and tonight a 25-year-old Army analyst who was supposed to look at boxes had rewritten the definition in the dark one shot at a time and had never once asked him to notice. "Birds are inbound," Reyes shouted. "2 of them. 8 minutes out. They copy our position." 8 minutes, Ethan looked at the ridge. 8 more minutes of Maya Reynolds holding a whole valley off the backs of his team with a dead man's rifle and a cold mind and hands that had to be failing by now. "She just has to hold 8 more minutes," he said. And on the ridge, as if she had heard him, as if some thread ran between them that needed no radio, Maya Reynolds settled into her rock, breathed out, found the pause, and got ready to hold. She had held for 6 minutes already. 8 more felt like 8 years. Her hands were the problem now. Not her mind. Her mind was still cold, still working, still sorting the valley into targets and threats and angles the way it had sorted numbers her whole life. But her hands had begun to betray her the way Carter had warned her they would, the way the body always eventually wins the argument the will has been having with it. Her fingers were stiff from gripping the rifle. Her shoulder ached where the recoil had punished it a dozen times. And somewhere behind her eyes, a fine tremor had started, the tremor of a person who has been running on pure adrenaline for too long and is beginning to run out of the fuel that has kept her alive. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, without panic, as information. "Your hands are shaking," she told her at a voice that sounded, she realized, exactly like Carter's. "So slow down. A shaking hand can still make a slow shot. It can't make a fast one. So don't make fast ones." She slowed down. Down in the draw, Ethan Cole was doing the opposite. He was moving fast because 8 minutes with 2 helicopters inbound is not a rest, it is a countdown. And a countdown in a leaderless valley full of angry men is the most dangerous kind of time there is. "Talk to me," he said to Reyes. "Where are they? What are they doing?" "They're regrouping Cap. They lost their commander, but they didn't lose their numbers. Somebody's taking over down there. Somebody's getting them organized again." Reyes was watching the valley floor over his sights. "They know we're moving to the draw. They're going to try to cut us off before the birds get here." "How many?" 20, maybe more. And they're not charging blind anymore. They're bounding, covering each other. Whoever took over knows what he's doing." Ethan felt the cold return to his stomach. Killing Rashid had broken the enemy for exactly as long as it takes a disciplined force to find its next leader. In 8 minutes was more than enough time for that to happen. The fight was not over. The fight had simply changed hands. And up on the ridge, Maya had seen the new commander before any of the SEALs had. She had seen him the way she saw everything, by watching for the pattern. In the chaos after Rashid fell, when the fighters had wavered and looked at each other and begun to break, one man had not wavered. One man had moved through the confusion with purpose, grabbing shoulders, pointing, organizing, pulling a leaderless mob back into a fighting force by sheer force of will. She had watched him do it. She had understood immediately that he was the new problem, and that he was a smarter problem than Rashid had been, because Rashid had led from the front, from the open, from ego, and this new man led from cover, from behind, from patience. He had learned from watching Rashid die. He was not going to make the same mistake, which meant she was not going to get the same shot. "He's good," she said out loud to no one, to the rifle, to the memory of Carter. "He's better than the last one. He's not going to show me anything." She did not know his name. She did not need his name. She had a name for him already, the only name that mattered on a battlefield. The next problem. Down in the draw, that same next problem was making itself felt. The enemy had stopped firing wildly and started firing purposefully, and the difference was immediate and terrible. Rounds began to strike the rocks around the SEAL team with intention, with coordination, walking in from 2 directions at once as the new commander pushed his men into a pincer designed to close on the draw before the helicopters arrived. "They're flanking us," Kowalski shouted. "Left and right, Cap. They're going to box us in the draw." "Reynolds can't cover both," Ryan said from the ground, his voice thin with pain and with understanding. "One shooter, 2 flanks. She's going to have to pick one and let the other one come. There's no way. There's no way to hold both." Ethan Cole made the calculation and hated it. If the enemy closed both flanks, the team died in the draw minutes before rescue, close enough to hear the rotors. If Maya covered one flank, the other flank got through. The only way to hold both was to have a second shooter, and the only other shooter in the valley was lying on his back with a hole in his side, unable to lift a rifle past 50 meters. Unless... "Ryan!" Ethan crouched over the wounded sniper. "That eastern flank. The close one, the one coming up the draw. How far?" 40 meters, maybe 50. Close." Ryan's eyes found his captain's. "Why?" "Because you said you could hold a carbine and hit something at 50. This is 50. Ryan Walker looked at him, and then slowly, painfully, using his one good arm, the SEAL sniper dragged himself up against the rock and reached for a carbine, and something came back into his face that the wound had taken out of it. "Give me the near flank," he said. "Let Reynolds have the far one. Let the 2 of us cover this whole draw, and let these people come and die in it." "That's my sniper," Ethan said, and there was fierce love in it. "No cap." Ryan almost smiled through the pain. "I'm your second sniper now. She's your first. I'm just the guy who used to have her job." And that right there was the twist that none of them saw coming. The deep turn that reorganized everything they had believed for their entire careers. It was not that a support soldier had picked up a rifle and gotten lucky. It was that the best shooter on that SEAL team, a man who had spent years earning that title, had just looked up at a ridge, understood what the woman on it was doing, and demoted himself. Willingly, gladly, because he had finally met someone better, and she had come from the last place he ever would have looked. The two flanks came at once. On the near flank, Ryan Walker, one arm bleeding, propped against a rock, fired his carbine at 40 meters and killed a man, and then another buying seconds holding the line. He could hold doing the small close work while his hands still had it in them. And on the far flank, 300 meters out in the dark, half-deaf hands, shaking running on the last of the cold Carter had built into her, Maya Reynolds did the far work, the impossible work, the work that only she and that whole valley could do. She read the bounding fighters, she found their rhythm, she learned in about 4 seconds the timing of their cover and move, and she began to drop them in the half-second gaps when they left cover one and then another. Unhurried patience, slow and smooth, exactly the way a hard man in Montana had taught a little girl to cut a running coyote out of a herd. "They're holding," Reyes breathed, watching both flanks stall, watching the enemy advance come apart against two shooters who had no business being able to hold anything. "Cap, they're actually holding. Ryan's got the near side and Reynolds has got the far side, and they're holding the whole draw." "How long till the birds?" 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Ethan looked at the ridge and looked at Ryan sagging against the rock and did the math one more time. Ryan was fading. The wound was taking him. Every shot cost him more than the fun, and his carbine was almost dry, and in another minute the near flank was going to have a hole in it that a one-armed dying man could no longer fill. And Maya could not cover both. Everyone knew it. Physics knew it. "Ryan," Ethan said, "how many rounds?" 6. A pause. 5. "When you're dry, the near flank's open." "I know, Cap." Ryan's voice was going soft, going somewhere far away. "I know. But you'll be out of the draw by then. You'll be at the high ground. Just leave me here and I'll shoot till I'm dry, and I'll take as many as I can with me." "Nobody's leaving anybody." Ethan's jaw was iron. "I already told you, that's not who we are. That's not who she made us tonight." Because that was the real change, the thing that had happened in the valley that was bigger than the battle. A team that had walked in believing they knew who was a warrior and who was baggage, had watched a woman they dismissed become the reason they were still breathing, and in watching her they had become better than they were. Braver, more loyal, more unwilling to leave anyone behind. She had not just saved their lives. She had shown them something about themselves that they had forgotten, and now they could not unsee it. Up on the ridge, Maya felt the near flank problem before she was told it, because she had been half-tracking Ryan's slowing rate of fire the whole time, filing it away the way she filed everything. She knew his carbine was going quiet. She knew what it meant. She knew that in about 30 seconds the near flank would open and the enemy would pour into the draw, and everything she had done for the last 9 minutes would come apart in the last 3. She had a choice. She could stay on the far flank where she was effective, where the shots were long and clean and suited to her rifle, and she could hold that flank and let the near flank fall. Or she could swing the rifle 180 degrees, try to take the near flank at a bad angle down into the draw, a harder shot, a lower percentage shot, and in doing so give up the far flank she had been holding. Either way, one flank opened. Either way, men died. That was the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was cruel, and there was no version of it that saved everyone. Unless she stopped thinking like a shooter and started thinking like an analyst. Because that was who she really was. That was the thing Carter had understood that even Carter had maybe not fully understood. She was not a sniper who used to be an analyst. She was an analyst who had learned to shoot, and an analyst does not accept the problem as given. An analyst looks at the problem until she finds the assumption inside it that is wrong. And the wrong assumption was that she had to kill all of them. She did not have to kill all of them. She had to kill the one who was making them work. The new commander, the smart one, the one leading from cover, from patience from behind. She had lost track of him when the flanks came in, had let herself get pulled into the target-rich chaos of the bounding fighters, had made the exact mistake she had watched Rashid make, which was to focus on the soldiers instead of the thing that held the soldiers together. She stopped. In the middle of the worst 3 minutes of her life, with two flanks closing and a dying man's carbine going quiet and a whole team about to be overrun, Maya Reynolds stopped shooting and went still and hunted for the one man who mattered. "She's not firing," Reyes said, panic climbing. "Cap the far flank." She stopped firing. "They're getting up. They're moving." Come on, Ethan whispered to the ridge. Come on. You see something. You always see something. What do you see? She saw him. She found the new commander the way she had found everything that night, by watching for the pattern, and the pattern of a man leading from cover is that even a man in cover has to look. He has to see his battlefield. He has to lift his head just for an instant, just far enough to read the flanks he is commanding. And this man, this smart, patient man who had learned from watching Rashid die, made the one mistake that even the smartest commander cannot avoid. Because you cannot command what you cannot see, and to see you must for 1/2 second be seen. He lifted his head, and 350 meters away, half-deaf hands shaking down to the last reserves of a cold, a 51-year-old man had built into her on freezing mornings months before anyone needed it. An army analyst who was supposed to look at boxes breathed out, lived in the pause, and did the only thing she truly knew how to do. She solved the problem. The new commander of the enemy force in that valley, the second man to lead them that night, the smart one, the patient one, the one who had learned from watching his predecessor die, fell without ever knowing what had found him. And for the second time in 10 minutes, the fighters below lost the voice that had been holding them together. Only this time there was no third man. This time the enemy broke. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way these things happen in ones and twos, and then in a flood fighters who had lost 2 commanders in 10 minutes to a ghost they could not find on a ridge. They had cleared fighters who had walked into this valley, certain of an easy victory, and were now watching their own attack come apart against an enemy that would not die and a shooter that could not be located. They began to fall back. They began to melt into the dark. The pincer that had been closing on the draw came apart, as the men holding it decided one by one that whatever was on that ridge was not worth dying for now that no one was ordering them to. "They're breaking," Reyes said, and he could not believe his own voice. Cap, they're breaking. They're pulling back. She broke them. She broke the whole force with 2 shots. Ethan Cole looked at the emptying valley, and then he looked up at the ridge, at the woman he still could not see, and for a moment he could not speak at all. "She didn't break them with 2 shots, he finally said. "She broke them with 2 shots at the end of 100 good decisions. Anybody can pull a trigger. She spent 10 minutes earning those 2 triggers." He shook his head slowly. "I've served with legends. I've served with men who had statues built for less than what she just did. And she's an army specialist who came along to look at boxes." The rotors came in low from the north, 2 of them thundering up the valley, and the sound of them was the most beautiful sound any man in that draw had ever heard. Ropes dropped, crewmen leaned out, and the remnants of a SEAL team that had walked into a valley to die began at last to walk out of it alive. They carried Ryan Walker. They carried Torres. They carried the wounded, and they moved the living, and through all of it, as the birds settled and the extraction began. Ethan Cole kept looking up at the ridge, waiting, watching, needing to see her come down. And she came down. She came down slow, the way she did everything, picking her footing in the dark, the long rifle slung across her back. And when she finally stepped into the light spilling from the helicopter, when the men on that team finally for the first time all night laid eyes on the person who had saved them, not one of them said a word. They just looked at her. A 25-year-old woman, small in her gear, her face streaked with dirt and grit, her hands still trembling, slightly at her sides. Her eyes hollow with the particular exhaustion of someone who has stayed cold for far too long and is only now in the safety of the light beginning to feel the cost of it. She did not look like a legend. She did not look like the deadliest person in Afghanistan. She looked like exactly what she was, a tired soldier who had done an impossible thing and was not sure yet how to carry it. Ethan Cole walked up to her. And this captain, this decade-long veteran, this man who had walked past her for 3 days and seen nothing stopped in front of Maya Reynolds and did the only thing that felt like enough. He came to attention and he saluted her. "Specialist Reynolds," he said, and his voice was not steady. "I'm Captain Ethan Cole. I've been the officer in command of this team for 2 years, and I want you to know something." He held the salute. "I looked right at you for 3 days, and I never saw you. That's the biggest mistake I've made in this whole war, and it will never happen again. Not with you, not with anybody." His jaw worked. "You saved 8 men tonight. You saved my whole team, and I am ashamed that I did not even know your first name until an hour ago." Maya Reynolds looked at the saluting captain, at the exhausted men behind him, Watching her was something she had never seen aimed at herself in her entire life. And for a moment, the cold place that had held her together all night finally cracked, and something human came up through it. Maya, she said quietly. My first name is Maya. Maya, Ethan finished the salute. Thank you for all of it, for every shot, and for the ones you waited on, which I'm starting to understand were the hard ones. She almost smiled. It was a small, tired, broken thing, but it was real. The waiting is the shot, she said, and she did not know she was quoting Carter, or maybe she did. The trigger's just the end of it. They loaded onto the birds. And as the helicopters lifted out of that valley up over the ridge, she had held out into the dark toward home. Maya Reynolds sat with the rifle across her knees, Ryan Walker's rifle, and she looked back down at the black ground where she had become, in the space of 11 minutes, someone she did not yet recognize. She did not feel like a hero. She felt the weight, the specific weight of the men she had killed and the men she had saved, weight that Carter had warned her about on a cold morning long ago, the weight that comes to anyone who has ever been the one who stays. She understood sitting there that she was going to carry this night for the rest of her life, and that no medal and no salute and no captain's shame would ever make it lighter. But she also understood something else. Something Carter had tried to tell her, and she had not believed until this exact moment. She had been ready, not because she was brave though she was, not because she was lucky though God knew she had been. She had been ready because a man nobody else would have bothered with had seen something in her, and because she had chosen every cold morning to build the fact of her readiness in the dark, long before the night came when 8 men's lives would depend on it. Below her, the valley disappeared into the black. Beside her, 7 men she had saved sat in exhausted silence, stealing glances at the woman they would never again mistake for baggage. And ahead of her, though she did not know it, yet waited a choice that would define the rest of her life, and a reckoning and a quiet reunion with an old sergeant major who had known from the very first time he watched her look at the hills instead of the helicopter exactly what she was going to become. The birds flew on into the dark, carrying home the soldier that nobody had watched, and the men who would spend the rest of their lives making sure the world finally saw her. The birds set down at the forward base just before dawn, and the first thing Maya Reynolds saw when the ramp dropped was Sergeant Major Daniel Carter standing on the tarmac alone waiting. He was not supposed to know. That was the thing that struck her first, even through the fog of exhaustion. The mission had been dark, the details classified, the extraction rushed. There was no reason for a 51-year-old sniper instructor to be standing on the flight line at that hour, and yet there he was, hands in his pockets, watching the ramp, his weathered face unreadable in the gray light. He had known, somehow the way old soldiers always know, he had known. Maya walked down the ramp with Ryan Walker's rifle still slung across her back, and she stopped in front of Carter, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. The other men filed past, carrying the wounded, giving the 2 of them a wide berth without quite understanding why, sensing that something was passing between the tired young woman and the old sergeant major that did not need words and would not survive them. You look like hell, Carter finally said. I feel like hell. Good. He studied her face, and his eyes, which had watched 10,000 soldiers come home from 10,000 bad nights, read everything on it in about 2 seconds. The exhaustion, the tremor she was still trying to hide. And underneath both of those, the thing he had been afraid he would see and had known he would see the weight. You carried it, didn't you? All of it. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. How many? He asked quietly. I stopped counting. Her voice was flat, worn down to nothing. That's not true. I didn't stop counting. I remember every one. I just didn't want to say the number out loud. Carter nodded slowly. You never will stop counting. Anybody who tells you they stop counting is either lying or already dead inside. The counting is what keeps you human, Reynolds. The day you stop counting is the day I stop respecting you. He paused. You saved 8 men tonight. I know. You don't sound glad about it. I'm glad they're alive. She looked past him at the men being carried toward the medical tent, at Torres limping on a wounded leg, at Ryan Walker on a stretcher, with his hand raised in a weak salute in her direction. I'm glad they're alive, Sergeant Major. I just didn't know it would feel like this. Being glad and being sick at the same time. Nobody told me it would be both at once. I told you, Carter said gently. On the last morning. You just didn't believe me. Nobody ever believes me. That's fine. You're not supposed to believe it. You're supposed to live it, and now you have. He reached out and in a rare gesture put a hand on her shoulder. Welcome to the other side of it, Maya. It's a lonelier place than the range, but it's a truer one. Behind them, Captain Ethan Cole had come down the ramp last, having refused to leave until every one of his men was off the bird, and he stood now watching the sergeant major and the specialist, and something clicked into place in his mind. He walked over. Sergeant Major Carter. Captain, you trained her. I did. On your own time, off the books. A logistics and intel specialist that the whole base thought was baggage. Ethan's voice was not accusatory. It was full of something closer to wonder. Why, what did you see that nobody else saw? Carter looked at the captain for a long moment, and then he looked at Maya, and then he said the thing that would stay with Ethan Cole for the rest of his career. I saw somebody who watched the hills instead of the helicopter, Carter said. That's all. That's the whole thing. Every soldier on this base watches the helicopter because the helicopter is loud, and it's in front of them, and it's easy to look at. She watched the hills because the hills are where the threat is, and she couldn't not look at them. It wasn't training, it was wiring. He shrugged. You can teach a person to shoot in a few months. You cannot teach a person to see. Either they see or they don't. She saw, and everybody looked right past her because she didn't fit the picture in their head of what a shooter looks like. He fixed Ethan with a hard old eye. Including you, Captain. No offense. None taken, Ethan said quietly. You're right, including me. 3 days passed before the reckoning came, and it came as these things always come from above. Word of what had happened in that valley did not stay in the valley. It could not. 8 men had walked out of a perfect ambush alive, and 8 men talk, and the story of the Army specialist on the ridge moved up the chain, the way water moves downhill unstoppable, finding every crack. By the 3rd day, there were officers on that base who had never spoken to Maya Reynolds asking questions about Maya Reynolds, and not all of the questions were kind. Because here is the thing about a story like hers that the movies never tell you. When a support soldier does something a special operations soldier is supposed to do, not everyone celebrates. Some people are threatened by it. Some people have spent careers building the wall between the operators and the support staff, and a 25-year-old analyst with a dead man's rifle had just walked straight through that wall, and there were men with rank and ego who did not like it one bit. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a summons. They want to talk to you, Ethan told her, finding her outside the intelligence tent on the 3rd afternoon. The command element. There's a colonel flew in. He wants to understand what happened. Understand what happened, Maya repeated, or find something wrong with it. Ethan hesitated, and the hesitation told her everything. There's some people asking how an intel specialist ended up on an overwatch position with a SEAL sniper's weapon. There's some questions about protocol, about whether you were where you were supposed to be, about whether. He stopped. About whether I should have picked up the rifle at all, Maya finished for him. About whether it was my place. Yeah. She almost laughed, but there was no laughter left in her. 8 men are alive, Captain, and there are people in a tent trying to figure out if I broke a rule by saving them. I know how it sounds. It doesn't sound like anything. It's exactly what I expected. She looked at him steadily. I've been the invisible one my whole career, Captain. I know how this works. When you're invisible, nobody minds you. The second you become visible, everybody's got an opinion about whether you're allowed to be. She squared her shoulders. Let's go. Let's hear it. What happened in that tent Ethan Cole would describe for years afterward as the proudest and angriest hour of his military life. The colonel was not a bad man. That was almost the worst part. He was a competent, careful officer who had spent 30 years enforcing the structures that kept a military functioning. And to him, those structures were not obstacles. They were the difference between an army and a mob. He looked at the situation and he saw a support soldier who had operated far outside her lane, who had taken a weapon she was not qualified on, according to any paperwork that existed, who had engaged targets that were the responsibility of trained special operations personnel, and who had, in doing all of that, exposed the command to 100 questions it did not have easy answers for. Specialist Reynolds, the colonel said, I want to be clear that I'm not questioning the outcome. 8 men are alive, and I thank God for it, but I have to understand the process. You are an intelligence analyst. You are not a qualified sniper. There is no record of you completing any marksmanship program beyond basic qualification. And yet you're telling me you made engagement shots at 400 meters in the dark on a moving enemy with a weapon system you have no documented training on. He leaned forward. Do you understand why that creates a problem for me? I understand why the paperwork creates a problem for you, sir, Maya said. I don't understand why 8 living men create a problem for you. A ripple went through the tent. Ethan, standing along the wall, had to fight to keep the smile off his face. That's not, the colonel started. With respect, sir. Her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. You asked if I understand the problem. I do. The problem is that I did something I'm not on paper as being able to do, and I understand that from a system standpoint, that's a real problem because if soldiers just decide to operate outside their qualifications whenever they feel like it, the whole structure falls apart. I understand that. I'm an analyst. Structure is my whole job. She took a breath. But I need you to understand something too, sir. When Sergeant Walker put that rifle in reach and got hit, there were 2 options in that valley. Option 1, the rifle stays in the dirt because the only person who could reach it wasn't qualified on paper. Option 2, the person who could reach it picks it up and uses it. Option 1 ends with 8 dead Americans and a clean record. Option 2 ends with 8 living Americans in this conversation. She held his eyes. I chose the conversation, sir. And if you put me in that valley 100 more times, I choose the conversation 100 more times. The tent was completely silent. And then from the wall before the colonel could respond, a voice spoke up that was not supposed to speak. Sir, permission to say something. It was Ryan Walker. He had insisted on being there, had come in on crutches against the advice of every medic on that base, the man whose rifle it had been, the man whose job she had done. The colonel looked at him and nodded. I'm the qualified sniper, sir, Ryan said. I'm the one with all the paperwork, the schools, the quals, the records. Everything you're saying she doesn't have, I have. He shifted his weight painfully on the crutches. And I want to go on record in front of everyone in this tent saying that Specialist Reynolds is a better shooter than I am. Not braver, not luckier, better. I watched her make shots I couldn't make on my best day with 2 good arms and a full night's sleep. And when I understood what she was doing on that ridge, sir, I did something I've never done in my life. I stopped thinking of myself as the sniper on that team. His voice thickened. I demoted myself, sir. In my own head, in the middle of a firefight, I looked at what she was doing, and I thought, that's the sniper now. I'm just the backup. And I have never in my career felt that about anybody. So if you're asking whether she was qualified to pick up my rifle, sir, I'll tell you the truth. She was more qualified than me. The paperwork's just wrong. It's the paperwork that needs fixing, not her. The colonel looked at the decorated SEAL sniper on his crutches, and then he looked at the Army specialist standing straight back in front of him, and something in the old officer's face began slowly to change. And I'll add to that, sir. Ethan Cole stepped off the wall. You said there's no record of her completing a marksmanship program. That's true. There's no record. But there was a program. Sergeant Major Carter ran it on his own time at 0500 for 3 months because he saw something the rest of us were too blind to see. The reason there's no paperwork isn't that she wasn't trained. It's that the system didn't have a box for what she was. An intelligence analyst with the eye of a sniper doesn't fit the forms, so the forms just left her out. That's not her failure, sir. That's ours. He paused. We built a machine that only knows how to see people who fit the shapes we drew. And she didn't fit the shape, so the machine booked it right past the best shooter on this base for 11 months. Until a night in a valley when 8 lives depended on the one thing the machine couldn't see. The colonel was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Sergeant Major Carter, he said, is he on base? He is, sir, Ethan said. Get him in here. They got him. Carter came in and stood at ease in front of the colonel, calm as still water, a man who had faced down more colonels than this one had faced down mornings, and the colonel looked at him and asked the only question that mattered. Sergeant Major, you trained this soldier off the books, on your own time. Why? And Carter gave the same answer he had given Ethan on the tarmac, but this time he gave it to a colonel who had the power to do something with it. Because 31 years ago, sir, when I was a young sniper, an old sergeant major saw something in me that didn't fit the forms either. And he trained me off the books on his own time because the system didn't have a box for me yet. And I made a promise to that old man that if I ever saw it in somebody else, I'd do the same, forms be damned. He looked at Maya. I saw it in her the first week she was on this base. I've trained maybe 200 snipers in my career, sir. I've had 4 I'd call naturals. She's better than all 4. And she came to us as a logistics clerk because the only test we gave her when she enlisted was whether she was good with a computer. We never tested whether she could see. So we put the best natural shooter I've ever met behind a desk for 11 months, sir. And it took 40 enemy fighters and a dead man's rifle to find out what we'd been sitting on. He shook his head slowly. The system worked exactly like it was designed to work, Colonel. That's the tragedy. It found her by accident in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. If those men had died in that valley, we'd have never known what we'd lost. We'd have buried the best shooter in Afghanistan as a logistics casualty and never known the difference. The tent was silent again, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of men who are realizing they have been arguing about the wrong thing entirely. The colonel stood up. He walked around the table slowly and he stopped in front of Maya Reynolds and he looked at her for a long moment. Specialist, he said. I came in here to figure out whether you'd broken a rule, and you had. You'd broken about 6 of them. A pause, and I'm now certain that the rules were wrong and you were right, and that's a very uncomfortable thing for a man who's spent 30 years enforcing rules to have to say out loud. He straightened. I'm not going to stand here and pretend the system that overlooked you is going to fix itself. It won't. It never does. But I can do one thing right now in this tent, and I'm going to do it. He extended his hand. On behalf of a chain of command that failed to see you for 11 months, and on behalf of 8 men who are alive because you saw what we couldn't thank you. And I'm sorry. Maya Reynolds shook the colonel's hand. And that would have been the end of it, a clean and satisfying end, except that life is not clean and the reckoning was not over. Because there was one more person in that valley's aftermath who had not yet had his say, and he was the one whose opinion, though he did not outrank anyone in that tent, mattered more to Maya than all of theirs combined. That evening, after the colonel had flown out, after the tent had emptied, Ryan Walker found Maya sitting alone outside the medical station, watching the last of the light go out of the mountains to the east. He lowered himself down beside her on his crutches with a grunt of pain, and for a while the two of them, the sniper and the analyst, the man whose rifle it had been, and the woman who had used it, sat in silence. I need to tell you something, Ryan finally said. And I need you to let me get through the whole thing before you say anything, because it's hard for me to say. Okay. When you picked up my rifle. He stopped. Started again. When I got hit and I couldn't lift my arm and I pushed that rifle toward you, I did it because you were the only body close enough to reach it. That's the truth. I didn't do it because I believed in you. I didn't even know you. I did it because you were there. And I was out of options, and I figured one shot, maybe she gets lucky, maybe she buys us a couple seconds before we all die anyway. He swallowed hard. That's what I thought when I gave you my rifle. I thought this is a Hail Mary. This is the last desperate thing. This support soldier is going to miss, but at least we tried. Maya said nothing. She had promised to let him finish. And then you fired, Ryan said, and his voice broke, and the machine gun went quiet. And I thought, okay, that's one. That's a lucky one. And then you fired again. And again. And by the 4th shot, Maya, by the 4th shot, I stopped thinking you were lucky, and I started thinking I was in the presence of something I'd never seen before, and I've been doing this 15 years. He turned to look at her. I've trained with the best snipers this country has ever produced. I've watched legends work, and I lay in that dirt with a hole in my side, and I watched a logistics clerk who'd never fired a shot in combat do things with my rifle that made me feel like I'd never really understood what the weapon could do. And the whole time, all I could think was, we almost left her behind. We almost died in that valley, never knowing what was standing right next to us the whole time. He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. I've spent my whole career being the guy people underestimate becomes, he said, the quiet professional, the one who does the hard thing and doesn't need the credit. And I was so proud of being that guy that I walked right past you for 3 days without seeing that you were more of that guy than I ever was. So I don't have some big speech, Maya. I just have this. He held out his hand. Thank you for saving my life with a rifle I gave you because I'd given up. And I'm sorry it took me giving up to find out who you were. Maya took his hand. And this time, for the first time since the valley, Something in her cracked all the way open, and the tears she had been holding back for 3 days finally came quiet and hard. And Ryan Walker put his arm around the shoulder of the woman who had used his rifle better than he ever had, and the two of them sat in the dying light while she cried for the men she had killed, and the men she had saved, and the strange, terrible, unasked for weight of finally, after a lifetime of being invisible, being seen. "They're going to want to make you into something now," Ryan said quietly after a while. "You know that, right? Word's out. The story's moving. They're going to want to pull you out of intel and put you in a school and turn you into a legend. That colonel's already thinking about it." I could see it in his face. "I know. Is that what you want?" Maya wiped her eyes and looked out at the dark mountains, and for a long moment she did not answer because she did not yet know the answer, and she was not a person who gave answers she did not have. "I don't know yet," she finally said. "I know what everybody's going to want me to want. They're going to want me to want the rifle, the school, the legend." She was quiet. "But the rifle was never the thing, Ryan. Carter tried to tell me that it on the first of this morning, and I didn't understand him. The rifle's just a tool. The thing that saved you wasn't the rifle. It was the seeing. It was 11 months of learning to read a battlefield behind a computer screen, and a childhood learning to read patterns on a ranch, and 3 months learning to stay cold when everything's on fire. The rifle was just where all of that finally came out." She shook her head. "If I let them turn me into just a shooter, I think I lose the thing that actually made me useful. I become a legend, and I stop being what I am." Ryan looked at her with something close to astonishment. "You know," he said, "most people would kill for the chance to be turned into a legend, and you're sitting here worried it'll make you worse." "Because it would," Maya said simply. "A legend is a picture people carry around in their heads, and I've spent my whole life being invisible because I didn't fit the picture in people's heads. The last thing I want is to finally become a picture. Pictures are how they miss me in the first place." And that right there was the thing that no one had expected, the deepest turn of all. Everyone in that camp, from the colonel to Carter to Ethan Cole, had assumed that the story was about a hidden shooter finally getting her due, about an overlooked soldier finally claiming the recognition she deserved. They had assumed she wanted what everyone was supposed to want: the credit, the legend, the rifle. And instead, sitting in the dark with the man whose rifle she had wielded, Maya Reynolds was quietly refusing to become the very thing they wanted to make her. Because she understood in a way none of them did that the machine that overlooks people and the machine that turns them into legends are the same machine, and that both of them work by refusing to see the actual human being in front of them. She did not want to be overlooked, but she did not want to be a legend either. She wanted simply to be seen, exactly as she was. And she was beginning to understand that this, the simplest thing, is the one thing the Army had no box for at all. "So what are you going to do?" Ryan asked. Maya Reynolds stood up slowly, and she looked out one more time at the mountains, where 11 minutes had changed everything. And she picked up the rifle, his rifle, and she handed it back to him, the man it belonged to, the qualified one, the one with the paperwork. "I'm going to give you your rifle back," she said, "because it's yours. And then I'm going to go think about who I actually want to be instead of who everybody's decided I should be. And when I figure it out, I'm going to tell them, and it's not going to be the answer they're expecting." She started to walk away, and then she stopped, and she turned back. "Ryan." "Yeah. Thank you for giving up," she said, and there was the smallest smile on her tired face. "If you hadn't given up, you'd have held on to that rifle, and I'd still be behind a computer, and I'd never have found out what I could do." The smile faded into something more serious. "Sometimes the only way anybody ever sees us is when everything else falls apart. I don't know if that's beautiful or if it's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Maybe it's both." And she walked off into the dark, the woman who had been invisible and was now impossible to ignore, carrying a choice that no one could make for her toward a decision that would surprise every single person who thought they finally understood who Maya Reynolds was. The decision took her 4 days to make, and in those 4 days, the base changed around her in ways she had not expected and did not entirely welcome. The story kept moving. That was the thing she could not stop. Every time she walked to the chow hall, there were eyes on her now. And the eyes were not the old eyes, the ones that had slid past her as if she were furniture. These were new eyes, hungry eyes, the eyes of soldiers who had heard the story and wanted a piece of the person at the center of it. Men who had never spoken to her in 11 months suddenly wanted to sit with her. Men who had smiled at her the way Kowalski had smiled at her, the amused smile you give a tourist now, went quiet and respectful when she walked by, and somehow that was worse. I liked it better when they ignored me, she admitted to Carter on the second morning, at the range where it had all begun at 0500, because she did not know where else to go to think. I know you did, Carter said. He was cleaning a rifle he had no intention of firing, the way old men do things with their hands while their minds work. You want to know the ugly truth about being seen, Reynolds? Most people spend their whole lives wishing for it, and about 10% of the ones who get it discover they can't stand it. Being invisible is lonely, but being seen is exposing. When they couldn't see you, they couldn't judge you. Now they can do both. How do you live with it? You don't live with their version of you, Carter said. You can't. Their version is always wrong, whether it's too low or too high. The soldier who thought you were baggage was wrong. The colonel who wants to make you a legend is wrong too. Both of them are looking at a picture. The trick, and it's a hard trick, is to hold on to the true thing about yourself in the middle of all these people holding up false pictures and insisting you climb into one. He set down the rifle. You already know this. It's why you're up at 0500 instead of taking the interviews they keep offering you. She hadn't told him about the interviews. She should have known he'd know. Because that was the other thing that had happened. The story had moved so far, so fast, that it had gone past the base entirely. Someone had talked to someone, and now there were requests coming down the chain, requests to talk to the Army specialist who had saved a SEAL team, requests from public affairs officers who understood in the cold way that public affairs officers understand things, that a story about an overlooked woman becoming a hero was exactly the kind of story that people wanted to hear, and exactly the kind of story that made careers and not necessarily Maya's career. They want to put me on a stage, she told Carter. Public affairs. They've got a whole thing planned. The overlooked analyst who became a hero, they keep using that word, hero, like it's a costume they want me to wear. And you don't want to wear it. I don't know what I want. She sat down heavily on the firing line in the cold gray dark, and for once she let the exhaustion show all the way through. That's the truth, Sergeant Major. Everybody's got a plan for who I should be now. The colonel wants me in sniper school. Public affairs wants me on a stage. The team wants me to be their guardian angel forever. And I keep waiting to feel some pull toward one of them, and I don't feel anything except tired and sick and like I want to go back to being nobody. And I hate that I feel that because I know it's a coward's feeling. It's not a coward's feeling, Carter said sharply. Don't you dare call it that. You want to know what a coward's feeling is. A coward's feeling is wanting the stage, wanting the legend, wanting to climb into the biggest picture they'll hold up for you and let it hide who you really are. That's the coward's move. Reynolds and half the men they've turned into legends took it, and it hollowed them out. He looked at her hard. What you're feeling, the pullback toward being nobody, that's not cowardice. That's your instinct telling you that all these plans people have for you are ways of not seeing you. Being a stage hero is just being invisible in a fancier costume. You'd be a picture again. And you've been a picture your whole life. You're right to be scared of it. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then what do I do? She said. If I don't want the school and I don't want the stage and I can't go back to being nobody, what's left? What's the option nobody's offering me? And Carter smiled a slow, weathered, knowing smile, the smile of a man who had been waiting 4 days for her to ask exactly that question. That, he said, is the only good question you've asked all week. And I'm not going to answer it for you because if I answer it, it becomes my picture of you, and then I'm no better than the rest of them. But I'll give you a place to stand while you find it yourself. He leaned forward. What was the thing you did in that valley? Not the shooting. The shooting was the last 2%. What was the thing? Maya thought about it. She thought about it the way she thought about everything, slowly turning it over, looking for the pattern underneath. I saw it before it happened, she said slowly. The ambush. I read it off the ground on the way in. I told Kowalski. I said, this ground makes me nervous. This looks like the pictures. And he laughed at me and we kept walking. She looked up. The shooting saved them in the valley. But if anybody had listened to me before the valley, there wouldn't have been a valley. I saw the trap before we walked into it. That was the thing, not the rifle, the seeing. I saw it and nobody listened because I was the analyst, and analysts don't get listened to when there are operators in the room. There it is, Carter said quietly. That's your answer. You just don't like it yet because it's harder than the rifle. What's harder than the rifle? Making them listen, Carter said. Any fool can pull a trigger, Reynolds. You proved that a natural can outshoot a trained man in one night, but the shooting only mattered because you were already in the valley, already ambushed, already down a man. The real skill, the one nobody's going to give you a school or a stage for, is the one that stops the valley from happening in the first place. It's the seeing. And the tragedy of that skill is that when it works, nothing happens and nobody notices and nobody gives you a medal for the ambush that didn't occur because you saw it coming. He stood up slowly, an old man's careful unfolding. You want to know the option nobody's offering you. It's the option that doesn't come with a sermon or a legend because its whole nature is invisibility. It's being the person who sits between the intelligence and the operators and refuses to let anybody walk into a valley again. It's not glamorous. Nobody makes movies about the ambush that got called off. But it's the thing you actually are, and it would save more lives than 100 perfect shots. Maya sat very still, because he was right and she knew he was right, and the knowing landed in her chest with a weight that was different from all the other weights she had carried that week. This was not a burden. This was a purpose, and purpose she was discovering was heavier than burden, because a burden is something that happens to you, and a purpose is something you have to choose and keep choosing. They'll fight me on it, she said. The command. They've already decided what my story is. The hero shooter. If I tell them I don't want the school and I don't want the stage, that I want to go back to Intel, but with the authority to make operators actually listen, they're going to think I've lost my mind. It doesn't fit the picture. No, Carter agreed. It doesn't fit the picture. It never does. That's how you know it's the true thing. He picked up his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. The true thing never fits the picture, Reynolds. If it fit the picture, they'd have seen it already. The whole reason they missed you for 11 months is that the true thing about you didn't fit any box they had. And now you've got a chance to make them build a new box. Not for you, for the next one. For the next kid who watches the hills instead of the helicopter and gets stuck behind a desk because nobody thought to test whether she could see. He looked at her. That's a thing worth fighting the command over. That's a thing worth more than a stage. He started to walk off the range, and then he stopped the way she had stopped when she walked away from Ryan, the way the important things always seem to require one more turn. For what it's worth, Carter said, I think you already knew all this before you asked me. I think you've known since the valley. You just needed somebody to say it out loud so you'd stop being scared of it. He almost smiled. That's the last thing I'll ever teach you, Maya. The answer's usually the one you're most afraid of, because if it were easy, you'd have already done it. The fear is how you know it's yours. The reckoning with the command came the next afternoon, and it did not go the way anyone in that tent expected. The colonel had flown back in. That alone told Maya how far the story had traveled, that a full colonel was making a second trip to a forward base to deal with the question of one specialist. He had brought people with him, this time staff officers, a public affairs officer with a folder full of plans, and the whole apparatus of a system that had decided what to do with Maya Reynolds and now simply needed her to agree to it. Specialist, the colonel said, and his voice was warm now, warmer than it had been in the first meeting, the warmth of a man who has decided you are an asset. I've been thinking a great deal about you these past days, about what you did and about what we owe you and about how we correct the failure that left you behind a desk for 11 months. He gestured to the public affairs officer. We have a plan. I think you're going to like it. We want to send you to the advanced marksmanship program. Full sponsorship. And alongside that, there's an opportunity to tell your story properly in a way that honors what you did and frankly does some good for a lot of young women who need to see that there's a place for them in this fight. He smiled. We want to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. We want to make you the face of that. It was Maya understood a generous offer. It was more than most soldiers ever got. It was recognition and opportunity and a stage, and it was offered with genuine goodwill by a man who was trying in the only language his system knew how to speak to make things right. And she was about to turn all of it down. Sir, she said, thank you. I mean that. I know what you're offering, and I know it's more than I had any right to expect, and I know you're offering it because you're trying to do the right thing. She took a breath. And I have to say no. The tent went still. The public affairs officer's smile froze. The colonel blinked. No, he repeated. No, sir. Not to all of it, but to most of it. She stood a little straighter. I don't want the marksmanship school, and I really don't want the stage. Specialist, I'm not sure you understand what you're turning down. I understand exactly what I'm turning down, sir. I'm turning down being made into a legend. She held his eyes. And I need to explain why, because if I don't explain it, it's going to sound like false modesty or fear, and it's neither. She gathered herself. Sir, the reason nobody saw me for 11 months is that I didn't fit the picture in anybody's head of what a valuable soldier looks like. And now you want to fix that by putting me into a different picture. The hero shooter, the face of women in combat, and I understand the impulse. But sir, with respect, that doesn't fix the problem. It just moves me from a picture that was too small to a picture that's too big. Either way, I'm a picture, and either way, the next kid like me is still invisible because you'll have solved my particular case without solving the thing that made my case happen. The colonel leaned back slowly. Go on. The thing that saved those 8 men wasn't the shooting, sir. I know that's the part everyone wants to talk about because it's dramatic and it makes a good story. But the shooting was the last 2%. The thing that actually mattered was that I saw the ambush before we walked into it. I read it off the ground. I told a SEAL on the way in and he laughed at me, and we kept walking, and then everything I predicted came true. She let that sit. If anyone had listened to me before the valley, sir, there would have been no valley. No wounded, no dead, no dramatic shooting, nothing. Just an ambush that didn't happen because somebody saw it coming and somebody else believed her. And that's the thing I actually am, sir. I'm the person who sees it coming. And right now in this army, that person gets ignored because she's an analyst, and analysts don't get listened to when operators are in the room. She took a step forward. So here's what I want, sir. I don't want the school and I don't want the stage. I want a job that doesn't exist yet. I want to sit between the intelligence and the operators with enough authority that when I say this ground makes me nervous, somebody has to stop and listen instead of laughing and walking on. I want the seeing to count for something before the shooting is ever necessary. And I want you to build that job not as a favor to me, but as a fix to the thing that almost got 8 men killed, which was a system that produced a warning and then ignored it because of who it came from. She stood at attention. That's what I want, sir. It doesn't come with a stage. Nobody's going to make a movie about the ambushes that don't happen. But it'll save more lives than any shot I could ever make, and it's the only thing I've found in a week of thinking that I actually want to do with the rest of my life. The colonel was silent for a long, long moment. The public affairs officer looked as though someone had let the air out of him. The staff officers exchanged glances, and Ethan Cole, standing along the wall as he had stood in the first meeting, felt his chest fill with something so large he could barely contain it because he was watching a 25-year-old specialist do the bravest thing he had seen all week. Braver in its way than the Ridge, and that was refuse the easy glory in favor of the hard, invisible, unglamorous work that actually mattered. You're turning down a legend, the colonel finally said, to become a person who prevents things nobody will ever know needed preventing. Yes, sir. You understand that's a job with no recognition in it, no medals for the ambushes that don't happen, no stage. Most likely no thanks because people don't thank you for the disaster they never knew they avoided. I understand that better than anyone in this tent, sir, Maya said quietly. I've been that person my whole career, the one who does the thing that matters and gets no credit because the thing that matters doesn't look like anything. I'm not scared of being invisible, sir. I've been invisible for 11 months. What I'm scared of is being useless, and a legend is useless. A picture on a stage saves nobody. But a person in the right chair at the right moment who gets listened to saves everyone. I'll take the chair, sir. You can keep the stage. The colonel stood up. He walked around the table the way he had before, and he stopped in front of her the way he had before, but his face was different now. It was the face of a man who has just watched someone show him the difference between recognition and worth, and has understood perhaps for the first time in 30 years that they are not the same thing. When I was a young officer, the colonel said slowly, I turned down a staff job to take a command because the command came with glory and the staff job came with none. And I built a whole career on choosing the glory over the work. He was quiet for a moment. I've buried men who died because of decisions made by people who chose the glory over the work. And I have never, not once, in 30 years, had a soldier stand in front of me and choose the work over the glory as clearly as you just did. He extended his hand. The job you're describing doesn't exist. So I'm going to build it, and you're going to be the first one to hold it. And God help the operator who laughs at you and walks on, because I'm going to make sure they understand exactly what it cost the last time somebody did that. Maya Reynolds shook the colonel's hand for the second time in a week. And this time it was not an apology. It was a beginning. And that would have been enough, would have been a fitting end to the reckoning, except that as the tent emptied, as the staff officers filed out, and the deflated public affairs officer gathered his unused folder, Ethan Cole crossed the tent to her, and there was something in his face she had not seen before. "You know what you just did," he said quietly. "Turned down a school and a stage, apparently." "No." He shook his head. "You just made sure it never happens to the next one. That's what you did. Every kid who watches the hills instead of the helicopter, every analyst who sees the ambush and gets laughed at, every soldier who doesn't fit the picture, you just built them a chair." He paused. "Carter spent 30 years finding the ones nobody saw and training them off the books because the system had no box for them. You just spent 5 minutes making the system build the box." He caught them one at a time. "You just changed the whole net." His voice thickened. "Do you understand what that means? Carter saved the ones he could reach. You just made sure the Army reaches all of them." And Maya Reynolds, who had not thought of it that way, who had been so focused on the work in front of her that she had not seen the size of the thing she had just done, felt the ground shift under her one more time. Because she had walked into that tent thinking she was solving her own problem, the problem of what to do with a life that no longer fit its old shape. And she was walking out of it having, quietly, without meaning to, without any stage or any legend, changed the shape of the thing itself. Not for herself. For every invisible soldier who would come after her, who would watch the hills, who would see the trap, and who would now, because of 5 minutes in a tent on a forward base, have a chair to sit in, and an authority to speak with, and a system that had finally painfully learned to listen. "Carter told me the true thing never fits the picture," she said slowly. "He said if it fit the picture, they'd have already seen it." She looked at Ethan. "I think I finally understand what he meant. The reason they missed me for 11 months isn't that they were stupid or cruel. It's that they were looking at pictures instead of people. And you can't fix that with a better picture. You can only fix it by building something that forces them to look at the person." She was quiet. "That's the chair. The chair forces them to look." Ethan Cole looked at the woman in front of him, the specialist he had walked past for 3 days, the analyst he had checked off a list, the soldier who had saved his entire team from a ridge, and then turned down every reward the Army could offer in favor of a chair that did not exist. And he understood that he had been wrong about her in a way even deeper than he had first realized. He had thought that night on the tarmac that his mistake was failing to see a hero. He understood now that his mistake had been believing he knew what a hero looked like at all. Because the hero had not been the woman on the ridge with the rifle. That was just the part that showed. The hero was the woman in the tent choosing the invisible work over the visible glory, choosing the chair over the stage, choosing to spend the rest of her life preventing valleys that no one would ever thank her for preventing. "For what it's worth," Ethan said, "I've served with men who had statues built for less than what you just turned down." He came to attention the way he had on the tarmac, and he saluted her one more time. "It was the honor of my career to be saved by you, Specialist Reynolds. And it's a bigger honor to have watched you refuse to let it make you into something smaller." Maya returned the salute. And as the last of the light went out of the tent and the two of them stood there, the captain and the specialist, the man who had learned to see and the woman who had taught him something settled between them that would last the rest of both their lives. She had gone into that valley a person nobody watched. She was walking out of the whole ordeal a person who would make sure that everyone got watched, not with a stage, not with a legend, with a chair and an authority and the quiet, unglamorous, life-saving insistence that the person who sees the trap coming deserves to be heard before the trap ever closes. And somewhere in the gathering dark, a 51-year-old sergeant major who had spent 30 years catching the ones nobody saw sat cleaning a rifle he would never fire and smiled to himself because his last and best student had just done the thing he had never quite managed to do in 3 decades of trying. She had not just been seen. She had changed what it meant to see. The chair took 4 months to build, and in those 4 months, Maya Reynolds discovered that turning down a legend was the easy part, and that doing the invisible work was harder than any shot she had ever made. Because the thing about a job that has never existed is that nobody knows how to respect it yet. The colonel had made good on his promise. He had built the position an intelligence liaison embedded directly with the operational teams, with the authority to halt a movement if she read a threat the operators had missed. On paper, it was exactly what she had asked for. In practice, on her first day, she walked into a briefing room full of operators who had heard the story of the ridge and still somehow did not want to listen to her. "So you're the one," a team leader named Bradley said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. He was not one of Ethan's men. He had not been in the valley. He had only heard about it, and hearing about a thing and living it are two different educations. The intel girl who thinks she can tell operators where to go. "I'm the intel officer, Bob," Maya said evenly. "Who's going to tell you where not to go? There's a difference." "That right." Bradley smiled the smile she had seen 1,000 times, the smile of a man who has already decided you are baggage. "And what makes you qualified to tell my team anything about the ground?" And here it was on day one, the whole fight all over again, the exact fight she had walked into the valley believing was behind her. She could have told him about the ridge. She could have pulled rank, cited the colonel, made him listen with authority instead of respect. She almost did. But she had learned something in that valley about the difference between forcing a thing and earning it, and she understood that if she made Bradley listen with authority, he would obey her and hate her. And a man who obeys and hates you is a man who will find a way to be right when you are wrong just to prove a point, and men die when that happens. So instead, she pulled up the imagery for his upcoming operation, and she looked at it for about 90 seconds in front of the whole room, the way she looked at everything slow and cold and patient, and then she put her finger on a spot on the map. "This is where they'll hit you," she said. Bradley's smile faltered. "That's a standard approach route. We've used it a dozen times." "That's exactly why they'll hit you there. You've used it a dozen times, which means they've watched you use it a dozen times, which means the 13th time is the ambush." She traced the terrain. "Look at the ground. The route funnels here. The high ground on both sides has clean lines down into the funnel. There's a dry wash that lets a force move up to the shoulders without being seen from the route. And there's a village 2 kilometers out that's gone quiet in the last week, which usually means the fighters told the locals to leave." She looked up. "You walk that road on the 13th time, and 40 men come off those shoulders, and you'll be pinned in the funnel with the high ground gone before you know you're in a fight. I've seen it. I've been in the valley when it happened. The only difference between you and the team that walked into it is that they didn't have anybody to tell them, and you do. Right now, me." The room had gone very quiet. Bradley looked at the map for a long time. He was not a stupid man. That was the thing about operators. The good ones were not stupid, they were just proud, and pride and stupidity look the same right up until the moment a proud man decides to actually look. And Bradley looked, and he saw what she saw because it was there to be seen. It had always been there to be seen. It just took someone whose whole life had been spent learning to see it to point it out. "The dry wash," he said slowly. "I never even clocked the dry wash." "Most people don't," Maya said. "Most people watch the route. The route's loud and it's in front of you, and it's easy to look at. The threat's never in the thing you're looking at. It's in the thing you're not." She did not know she was quoting herself or her father or Carter or all three at once. She only knew that the words came out of her with the weight of everything she had learned, and that Bradley heard the weight in them, and that something shifted in the room. "So what do we do?" he asked. And the question was not a challenge anymore. It was a question. "You change the route," she said. "Or you keep the route and put your own overwatch on those shoulders first before you ever enter the funnel, so that when the 40 men try to come up the dry wash, they find you already there. You turn their ambush into yours." She almost smiled. "The seeing doesn't just keep you out of traps. It lets you set them, but only if you look at the ground the way they do instead of the way you wish it was." 3 days later, Bradley's team ran that operation with overwatch pre-positioned on the shoulders, and a force of 36 fighters came up the dry wash exactly where Maya had said they would, expecting to spring a trap, and found themselves in one instead. Not one American was wounded. The operation that should have been a disaster became a decisive victory, and it happened because A woman in a chair had looked at a map for 90 seconds and seen the thing that no one else had been looking for. And here was the twist that Maya had known was coming and that Bradley had not. Nobody gave her a medal for it. Nobody made a speech. There was no stage, no legend, no recognition because the thing she had prevented did not look like anything. From the outside, it looked like a routine operation that went well. Only the people in that room knew that it had been a catastrophe that didn't happen, and catastrophes that don't happen do not get parades. She had known that. She had chosen it with her eyes open. But knowing a thing and living it are two different educations. And there were nights in those first months when Maya Reynolds lay awake and felt the full weight of the choice she had made, the choice to spend her life doing the most important work in the room and receiving none of the credit for it, and wondered in the dark whether she had been a fool. It was Bradley of all people who put it to rest. He came to find her a week after the operation, and he did not smile the old smile, and he did not lean back in his chair with his arms crossed. He stood in front of her the way Ethan Cole had stood in front of her on the tarmac, and he said something that she carried for the rest of her career. "I've got a wife," Bradley said, "and 2 kids, a boy and a girl. And a week ago, I was going to walk my team up that route for the 13th time, and I'd have died in that funnel, and my kids would have grown up without a father, and my wife would have gotten a flag and a folded uniform and a story about how I died a hero." He swallowed hard. "And instead, I'm going to go home to them. Because you looked at a map for 90 seconds and saw the thing I couldn't see." His voice was rough. "Nobody's ever going to give you a medal for that. There's no medal for the funeral that didn't happen. But my kids are going to have a father, and I'm the only one who's ever going to know why, and I'm never going to forget it. Not ever." He put out his hand. "I laughed at you on day 1. I'm sorry. And I'll spend the rest of my career making sure the next operator who wants to laugh at the intel officer understands exactly what it cost the last man who did." Maya shook his hand, and in that moment she understood the answer to the question that had kept her awake. She had not been a fool. The recognition had never been the point. The point was Bradley's kids and the father who was going home to them, and the funeral that would not happen, and the flag that would not be folded. The point was the valley that no one would ever walk into because someone had seen it coming and someone else had finally learned to listen. That was the work. That was the whole work. And it did not need a medal because it had something better than a medal. It had a family that got to stay whole. Word of it spread, the way these things spread quietly operator to operator, the way the true stories always travel not on stages, but in the low voices of men who have seen something they cannot forget. The intel officer who reads the ground, the one who sees the ambush before it happens. And slowly over those 4 months, the smile that men had greeted her with on day 1, the amused smile you give a tourist, disappeared and was replaced by something Maya had never had aimed at her in her entire career. Trust, not the trust that comes from a story or a stage or a legend. The trust that comes from being right over and over in ways that keep people alive. The operators stopped laughing when she said the ground made her nervous. They started stopping. They started listening. And every time they listened, someone went home who would not have, and the chair that had not existed 4 months ago became, without anyone quite noticing the moment it happened, the most important chair on the base. She saw Carter twice more before he rotated home. The first time she found him at the range at 0500, the way she always found him, cleaning a rifle he would never fire, and she sat down beside him on the firing line and told him about Bradley, about the dry wash, about the operation that had turned an ambush inside out and sent 36 fighters into a trap of their own making. Carter listened to all of it without a word, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You did the thing I could never do," he finally said. "You trained me. I didn't do anything you couldn't do." "No." He shook his head slowly. "I trained you to shoot. That's a small thing, Reynolds. Any fool with patience can teach another fool to shoot. What you did in that tent and what you're doing in that chair, that's the thing I spent 30 years wishing I could do and never figured out how." He set down the rifle. "I caught them one at a time, the ones nobody saw. I'd find one every couple years, some kid stuck behind a desk who watched the hills, and I'd train them off the books, and I'd send them off, and I'd hope somebody out there would finally see them. And most of the time, nobody did. Most of my strays went back to their desks and disappeared because I could train them, but I couldn't make the Army listen to them." His voice was low. I saved a few, but the machine kept making more invisible people faster than I could catch them. And I used to lie awake and think, there's got to be a way to fix the machine, not just catch the ones it drops. And I never found it. He turned to look at her. And then you walked into a criminal's tent and you fixed it in 5 minutes. You didn't ask him to catch you. You asked him to build a chair so the next one wouldn't need catching. His eyes were wet and he did not bother to hide it because he was an old man and he had earned the right. 31 years I looked for that Maya, and my last student found it in her first week. That's not me training you. That's you being better than me. And it's the proudest thing that's ever happened to me in this whole long career. Maya did not know what to say, so she said the true thing. I only saw it because you taught me to look, she said. Everything I did in that tent I did because you spent 3 months at 0500 teaching me that the thing that matters is never the thing everybody's looking at. You didn't just train me to shoot Sergeant Major. You trained me to see, and the seeing is what fixed the machine. So it's not me being better than you. It's you still. It's just you finally working through somebody who got to sit in a chair you never got to sit in. Carter looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something he had never done in 3 months of training and 4 months of aftermath. He stood up and he came to attention and he saluted her. Sergeant Major, Maya said, startled. You don't. I'm a specialist. You don't salute me. I'm not saluting your rank, Carter said, holding the salute. I'm saluting the thing you did. A man's allowed to do that once in his life for one soldier, and you're mine. He held it a moment longer. Go save the ones I couldn't reach, Maya. All of them. That's the only thanks I'll ever want. The second time she saw him was the day he rotated home, and there was not much to say that they had not already said so. They did not say much. He shook her hand on the flight line in the gray dawn, the same flight line where he had stood waiting for her when she came home from the valley, and he told her one last thing before he walked up the ramp. You're going to spend your whole career being invisible, he said. You chose that. You chose the chair over the stage, which means you chose to do the most important work in the room and let other people take the credit. There'll be days you regret it. There'll be days you watch some operator get a medal for an operation that only went well because you saw the trap, and you'll feel it, that old thing, the wanting to be seen. He looked at her steadily. And on those days, I want you to remember something. The people who matter always see you. Bradley sees you. His kids will grow up knowing your name because he'll tell them every year on the anniversary of the day he should have died. Cole sees you. His whole team sees you. And I see you. The stage was never going to give you that. The stage gives you strangers who clap and forget. The chair gives you the ones whose lives you saved and they never forget. Not ever. He picked up his bag. You didn't choose invisibility, Maya. You chose the deepest kind of being seen there is. The kind that comes from the people you saved. Don't ever confuse the two. And then Daniel Carter walked up the ramp and flew home, and Maya Reynolds stood on the flight line and watched him go, and she understood that the last lesson was the truest one and that she would spend the rest of her life proving him right. The years passed the way years pass. She never took the school. She never took the stage. The public affairs officer's folder gathered dust in a drawer somewhere, and the legend that could have been made of her was never made. And if you had walked onto any of the bases where Maya Reynolds served over the years that followed, you would not have seen a hero. You would have seen a quiet woman with tired eyes sitting in a chair, looking at maps and imagery for hours at a time, saying every so often in a flat, calm voice, "This ground makes me nervous." And when she said it, people stopped. That was the whole thing. That was the entire monument to what she had done in the valley and in the tent. People stopped. Operators who would have laughed at an intel officer a few years earlier learned through the low network of stories that carries the truth through any army that when this particular officer said, "The ground made her nervous," you did not laugh and you did not walk on. You stopped. You looked. And more often than not, she was right, and the trap that would have closed on you closed on nothing instead because you were not there when it sprang. She saved lives she never met. That was the strange or quiet mathematics of the work she had chosen. Every soldier who did not walk into a funnel because she had rerouted them. Every team that pre-positioned Overwatch because she had read the dry wash. Every operation that went smoothly because she had seen the thing that was not being looked at. Those were lives saved by a person the saved would often never know existed. She was invisible to most of the people she protected, and she had made her peace with that because Carter had taught her the difference between being invisible to strangers and being seen by the ones who mattered, and the ones who mattered always knew. Ethan Cole made general eventually, and on the day he pinned on his first star in a ceremony full of speeches and family and the whole apparatus of recognition that Maya had turned down, he did something that no one in attendance quite understood. He asked for a specialist to be brought forward. Not a general, not a colonel, a specialist gray now at the temples, still quiet, still with the tired patient eyes, and he stood in front of the assembled crowd, a newly minted general officer. And he told the story of a valley on the Afghanistan border, and 40 fighters and a hidden shooter on a ridge, and a support soldier that nobody had bothered to see. "I've had a long career," General Ethan Cole said. "I've been decorated. I've commanded at every level. And in a few minutes, people are going to congratulate me on this star, and I'm going to accept it because that's how it works." He paused. "But I want everyone in this room to understand something. I would not be standing here. I would not have a career or a star or a life if a woman that I walked past for 3 days had not saved my entire team from a ridge and then done something even braver than that." He looked at Maya. She turned down everything the Army could have given her. The school, the stage, the legend. She could have had all of it, and she said no, and she asked instead for a chair that didn't exist so that the next invisible soldier would never be invisible again. She has spent her entire career doing the most important work in every room she's ever been in and receiving almost none of the credit for it on purpose because she understood something the rest of us took decades to learn. His voice broke just slightly. The work is the thing, not the recognition. The work. And there has never been anyone in my entire career who understood that as deeply or lived it as completely as Specialist Maya Reynolds. He turned to face her fully, and in front of the entire assembly, a general officer came to attention and saluted a specialist. "I got my star," he said, "but she's the reason I'm alive to wear it. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that everyone who serves under me understands that the most dangerous person in any room is not the one everybody's watching. It's the one nobody thought to see. I learned that in a valley. I learned it from her. And it is the most important thing I know." The room was silent, and then it was not. And Maya Reynolds stood at the front of a crowd that had finally, decades later, in the one way she had never sought and never wanted seen her. And she found to her surprise that it did not feel like a stage. It felt like the ones who mattered telling the truth out loud, and that was a different thing entirely, and she could bear it. She returned the general's salute, and when the ceremony was over, when the crowd dispersed and the speeches ended, she did not stay for the reception. She went instead to find a quiet place the way she always did, and she sat alone with her thoughts and the long weight of everything she had chosen. She thought about this valley. She thought about the boot on Torres's chest and Ryan's rifle pushed toward her in the dark and the machine gun that never opened fire. She thought about the shot she waited on, the one that killed the commander who had been so certain he'd already won. She thought about Carter gone, now passed in his sleep a few years back, an old man in a quiet house who had saved the ones he could reach and trained Astro, who reached the rest. She thought about Bradley's kids grown now, who had a father because she had looked at a map for 90 seconds. She thought about all the funerals that had not happened, all the flags that had not been folded, all the families that were whole because a woman nobody watched had spent her life watching the hills. And she understood sitting there the full shape of the thing she had built with her life. She had walked into that valley believing she was nobody, a support soldier, baggage, the one everyone looked past. And she had walked out of it with a choice, and she had made the choice that no one expected, and the choice had turned out to be the truest thing she ever did. She had refused to be a legend because she understood that a legend is just a picture, and a picture is how they missed her in the first place. And in refusing the picture, in choosing the chair, in choosing the invisible, unglamorous, life-saving work, she had done something that no legend could ever do. She had changed what it meant to see. The army she left behind at the end of her career was not the army she had entered. It was an army that had learned slowly and painfully that the person who sees the trap coming deserves to be heard before the trap ever closes. It was an army where the intel officer who says the ground makes her nervous gets listened to, where the analyst who reads the ambush before it happens has a chair and an authority and a voice, where the kid who watches the hills instead of the helicopter does not disappear behind a desk for 11 months because someone had built a box for exactly that kid and someone had insisted that the box be respected. She had not built it for herself. She had built it for all of them. And that, in the end, was the difference between the woman on the ridge and the woman she became. The woman on the ridge saved 8 men with a rifle. The woman she became saved thousands over the years with a chair and a voice, and the patient refusal to let anyone be overlooked the way she had been overlooked. Maya Reynolds retired quietly the way she had done everything, without a stage, without a parade, with only the ones who mattered gathered to see her go. And when they asked her at the end what she was proudest of, they expected her to say the ridge, the 11 minutes, the 40 fighters, and the 8 men saved, the shot that killed the commander. She did not say any of that. Not say any of, I'm proudest, as she said, of the ones I never met. The soldiers who went home to their families and never knew why. The ambushes that didn't happen. The funerals nobody attended because there was no funeral to attend. She looked around at the small gathered crowd of the ones who mattered. The rifle was never the thing. The rifle was the last 2% on the worst night of my life when everything had already gone wrong. The real work was making sure the worst night never came for anyone else. And I got to do that work for a whole career because an old man saw something in me nobody else saw, and because a colonel built a chair, and because a captain learned to salute a specialist. Her voice was steady and sure. I was the soldier nobody watched, and I spent my whole life making sure that nobody would ever have to be that again. That's the thing I'm proudest of. Not the shot, the chair. The chair mattered more. And that is the truth of Maya Reynolds, the whole truth, the truth that no medal and no legend and no stage could ever have contained. She was never the most visible soldier on any battlefield. She was never the one everybody watched. She spent her entire career in the quiet chair, doing the work that saved the most lives and earned the least recognition. And she chose that freely with her eyes open because she understood something that most people never learn. The most dangerous person on any battlefield is not the one everyone sees coming. It is the one nobody noticed until it was too late. And the most important person in any room is not the one on the stage. It is the one in the chair, seeing the thing that no one else is looking for, and quietly, patiently, without thanks or glory, keeping everyone alive. 40 fighters surrounded a SEAL team in a valley on the edge of the world, and they had counted everyone. They had forgotten to count her. And she spent the rest of her life making sure that no one ever again would be so easy to forget. Her name was Maya Reynolds. She was the woman behind the rifle, and then she was so much more than the rifle, and the world is safer because a 51-year-old sergeant major once watched a young soldier look at the hills instead of the helicopter and understood in that single moment exactly what she was going to become. She was the one nobody watched. And in the end, she was the one who made sure everyone else would finally be seen.